Okay. Call the meeting to order. We're a little behind today. We had another meeting just before this. And I do want to acknowledge at the opening someone who hasn't been in this council chambers very many times, but who hasn't been at all, I think, in this council chambers in his current capacity. I believe the MLA for Port Moody Coquitlam, Giuseppe Trazzolini, is here. Good to see you, Joe.
Thank you. First item are minutes of the Council Committee meeting held Monday, June 25th. The recommendation is that the committee approve the minutes.
Moved by Councillor Reamer, second by Councillor Robinson. All in favor? Opposed? Carried unanimously.
Item 2 is report of General Manager Planning and Development related to transit-oriented development strategy, open house consultation summary, and project update report number 2. We do have a presentation by our Manager of Community Planning, the project leader, and our planner from Community Planning.
Your Worship, perhaps as the team has taken the stage there, if I could just say a few opening remarks. Personally, I'm very pleased on how this project is progressing. We're moving at lightning speed and covering a lot of ground. And so we're here today for a couple of things. Sort of reporting back from the public meetings we had 2 weeks ago, sort of a summary of where we're at with some of the things we have nailed down. And one area it's really key is around rental housing, and we wanted to have a discussion with Council about that today, kind of in the same vein that we had around parking rates about a month ago. So that would be very helpful for us. It's interesting too to have a 3-member team presenting today, and I think it reflects sort of the transition in the community planning area. Bruce is back, and I always enjoy that. He wants to see this project through to completion successfully. But also, too, with the new community planning manager, Carl Johansson, he's taking a leading role in the rental housing piece. So it's a little bit of a handoff here and seeing that work get done as well. So, and of course, he's there through thick and thin, and he'll have a few remarks now. Thank you.
Great. Thanks, Jim. Carrie, do you mind flipping to these? Thanks. Great, thanks, Jim. Good afternoon, Your Worship and Council. The project team was last in front of you on June 11th with a project update, and we're very pleased to be back in front of you today with an update on further progress. The presentation today will be a little longer than typical. We're going to try and keep it to close to or under 15 minutes. And it will be myself, Bruce Irvin, and Carl Johansson presenting. We're going to cover three key components, which I'll touch on in a moment. But we're certainly looking forward to your feedback as we move forward. So I'm going to report back on the open houses we held in late June. Bruce will provide a status update of the TDS and identify next steps. And Carl will get into more detail talking about some rental housing policy options that we'd like some feedback on. So to maximize outreach for the open house, we engaged a number of awareness tools. We also held the open house in 2 locations, recognizing that this is a citywide initiative, so City Centre and also Coquitlam. And it was quite an engaging atmosphere. We had over 150 attendees, received 75 comment forms, and there was really excellent dialogue and discussion throughout both events. The open house covered 4 key areas. We looked at the proposed and presented the proposed TDS core objectives, outlined preliminary high-level policy areas that the TDS would cover, outlined the key study area components, recognizing that policies would be speaking to unique areas, and there was an overview of the parallel streetscape exploration work that's underway by the Strategic Initiatives Department. Touching on a few of the key feedback areas that are outlined in the report, the majority of respondents did indicate support for the core TDS objectives, which was great. The objectives deemed most important by those who responded included creating compact, complete communities with a mix of uses close to station areas, making sure that these station areas are great places to be, including amenities and destinations, and of course making sure there were sustainable transportation choices to get to those stations for pedestrians, bicycles, and transit users. Feedback related to density and building form indicated that the majority of respondents were supportive of high-density mixed use in the core and also supportive of a range of housing options and building forms in those shoulder areas, recognizing the importance of an effective transition as we move away from the core. When asked about the idea of allowing higher densities in exchange for developer contributions to fund community amenities, the majority of respondents did indicate support. However, 30% did disagree, but a lot of the dialogue and feedback that came through the open house indicated there is a strong desire and need for amenities in the station areas, and density bonusing is one of the key tools available to the city to support the provision of amenities. To support future planning, respondents were asked their opinions on some regional examples of mixed use to start getting us thinking about what are the key things people really like to see in these higher density mixed use neighborhoods. The three top choices that came through overwhelmingly was Newport Village and Suterbrook as good examples, Falls Creek in Yaletown, and the Lonsdale area in North Van. When asked if respondents agree that the city should play a role in creating or retaining rental housing near stations, over half indicated support for the city playing a role, and approximately 30% of respondents disagreed. I'm going to now hand it over to Bruce, who will provide an overview of the TDS status and next steps.
Thank you, Ryan. Council, we wanted to use an extra minute of this presentation just to make sure we updated you on where we are with the project at large. As you're well aware, the TDS is intended to be a one-stop shop, something that communicates a citywide vision in a very consistent manner for transit-oriented development. It's also designed to make sure we assist in the review of new developments that are on our doorstep and to make sure we guide future policy development in a very consistent manner. Where we're going, Council, at this time is we've developed 5 policy sets or buckets. We'll be bringing this forth to you in a very near future. We've allowed an internal circulation from our departments to give our comments back and our initial thoughts. But just as a heads up, there's sort of 5 areas I suggest. Really taking existing policy that we have, consolidating it, and making it tighter and more concise. The second is to make sure we're reinforcing and supporting approved policy that's specific to local areas. Yes, we're trying to do something citywide, but content is important locally. We also have developed some new policies that we'd like to bring to you in the very near future. And we have some policies where we feel our direction is solid. We know where we want to go, but we need to do our homework. We need to do our math and make sure that we detail those out for you. And there are some, one in particular, where we still feel we could use a little direction and a little discussion, and that's what Carl will be carrying on today. As you know, Council, we've identified about 30 different policies that we've consolidated that affect transit-oriented development. We have finished our consolidation of those. We have then turned to the areas themselves, looked at how they are existing, looked at how they would develop out under today's existing plans if we did nothing, and then asked ourselves, how do we sharpen a pencil? How do we raise our game and do even better? That's the second policy set, which is the local area emphasis. There's some policies we have that are specific, frankly, for example, how important employment is in the downtown core, or looking at the land use south of our existing core and how we're going to allow those to proceed. In the Lougheed and Coquitlam area in particular, for example, amenity funding strategies are very, very important, and we don't want to lose that emphasis of the local context. Our third policy set is the new policies. We think of these as more minor and more major policies. Sharing a heads up with you now on some of the major ones that we'd like to bring forward to you in a few weeks are, one, the transit supportive uses and densities. I think we've been very strong at making sure we're communicating in our local communities and city centre. You'll see this diagram, one of the ones that comes from our open house boards, talking about some very strong density right around the core of the station, but talking about some guides and some rules of how we would transition, depending on context, down to an outer point at the shoulder. We've also talked about establishing some policies we'll bring to you related to making sure our servicing is in place for this kind of growth. Further, we've looked at an employment strategy piece related to Coquitlam and Lougheed, a lower standard than the core, but we'd like to talk to you about that next time we come back. The idea of localization of amenities, if we collect funds, the importance of spending that fund locally or spending it so it benefits that area. A high-quality urban design, and moving from really our sustainable transportation plan, making sure that we're supporting sustainable transportation choices. There are some policies, though, Council, that we don't think we'll get to by the time we bring this draft to you. We know our general direction. We feel we have a good idea, but we need to make sure that we follow all the way through. So in terms of density bonusing, our parking management strategy, which was here recently, and the establishment of a community amenity contribution policy from a voluntary basis. Our intention there is to put those into an implementation plan and bring back a very short timeline and commit to that timeline to you next time we're here for how to detail that out. We think those are sort of worthy of an individual discussion as opposed to being completely detailed in the TDS. Finally, Council, there's one item that we're still scratching our heads on a little bit, and we're still looking for discussion and direction and wisdom. We have a number of different ideas and policies that Carl will detail, but this would be a really good opportunity for us to sort of seek some more direction as the third part of this particular presentation. So I'll turn it over to Carl to walk through that.
Thank you, Bruce. Good afternoon, Your Worship and Council. Like Bruce said, I'll be providing an overview of the rental housing policy in the report before you. So on June 11th, with the first update report to Council on a TDS, the issue of increased redevelopment pressure on purpose-built rental housing properties in Coquitlam was raised, and preliminary actions were presented for Council feedback. Those actions including developing interim policies to guide the retention and replacement of rental housing units in Coquitlam. So since then, staff have undertaken further work, and today we're like Bruce said, we're proposing policy options for Council feedback. Before I get into those options, a little bit more context to the issue. There's approximately 1,250 purpose-built rental units that could be considered at risk of redevelopment in Coquitlam due to some of these units are in buildings that have low improvement value relative to property value. It's about 30% of the units. Over 90% of the units are in buildings that are over 40 years old, which have a higher likelihood of being redeveloped over the long term relative to others. And 95% of these units are close proximity to rapid transit, and of course the redevelopment pressures that could come across as a part of that. So the likely result of redevelopment is that these purpose-built rental units could be replaced by strata buildings and units, resulting in the loss of rental units and renter displacement. Staff also anticipate that rezoning applications involving properties with purpose-built rental units may come forward soon. So we need to have a response for that. So before we get into the policy options, the question is, well, what's the city's role in this? And reviewing city policy, the official community plan identifies the need for rental housing options in the city, but also makes it clear that the city can't do this alone. It needs to work with stakeholders in the provision of new rental units. The affordable housing strategy is a little bit more specific. It contains policies that stipulate, protecting rental units from being converted to strata or being lost, and also encouraging the development of new rental units. So based on this, the city does have a role from a policy perspective, but again, cannot do this alone. Collaboration is needed between developers, senior government, and other organizations to find rental housing solutions. So a reasonable balanced approach or response is in order, and it's important to point out that the creation of new rental units when properties are redeveloped, that whole process, we need to make sure that we're not jeopardizing the ability or the viability of transit-oriented development around Evergreen Line stations. And there's also an understanding that and an expectation that developers should be proactive in finding rental housing solutions for renters on the properties they are seeking to rezone. And again, going back to the city's role as a land use regulator, utilizing a portion of the land lift to achieve new rental units is an option to look at. It's something that the city already does in terms of offering density bonusing opportunities. So is that a policy line that we want to continue with? So based on that context, a pragmatic, flexible approach is recommended where the city works with others, and we do that through creating a policy suite or a policy suite that balances property rights and tenant needs. It reflects the local rental market and development economics, and also best practices from around the region. And it also helps staff and council respond to differing development applications. There needs to be flexibility in the approach because some applications may involve small sites, some may involve large sites, there may be a different tenancy mix in terms of the renters on those sites. So there needs to be a flexible approach here. One size won't fit all. So in terms of the policy options, we've got some preliminary proposed options here for council feedback. So the first of which is the idea that developers that are seeking to rezone properties with purpose-built rental on them will need to submit a rental housing strategy as part of their rezoning application to the city. And in that strategy, the developer would detail how they are going to approach the issue of replacing purpose-built rental on the existing purpose-built rental on the site, maybe relocating renters if that's part of the proposal. Also, what are they going to do what kind of assistance are they going to offer for relocation? And this approach is very similar to the mobile home redevelopment policy that the city already has on the books. Another option to consider is the use of housing agreements. So in scenarios where new rental units are developed with new developments, having an agreement between the city and a developer that protects those new rental units as long-term rental stock, that's an important thing to have moving forward. Another option, and this one actually has a series of sub-options, is pursuing flexible rental housing solutions in order to get on-site rental units and or off-site rental units. And again, using a portion of the contribution from density bonusing or land lift contributions to fund new rental units. Also pursuing solutions where, for example, on large properties, maybe there's new on-site units are created through purpose-built or standalone purpose-built rental buildings. And also seeing if there's other opportunities for securing other sites for new rental buildings or units. Another policy option, this is an incentive that's being brought forward, is for purpose-built rental units, having reduced parking requirements applying to those units. And two things are behind that policy option is that with rental units, they're, especially at the lower end of income, there's a tendency to have less car ownership and less need for vehicle parking stalls. And also, an underground parking stall can run between $25,000 and $30,000 a stall. So, reducing the amount of those required in a standalone rental building will help to reduce the per door cost, which can be advantageous for getting new rental built. And of course, the last option we're presenting today, pursuing partnerships with senior government, again, to get funding to help fund new rental units, to make those happen. Okay, so there's a couple of key questions that we need to answer before we come up with specific policy options for your consideration. Should there be specific targets for new rental housing in Coquitlam? Is it a 1-to-1 replacement ratio that we're going after, or is it something else? And what kinds of new rental housing are needed in Coquitlam? Is there a cohort of renters there that will require, rent geared to income units or lower income or non-market? Basically, right now, the 1,250 units are all market rental, but some of them are at the lower end of that market rental spectrum in terms of affordability. So further work, staff will undertake a rental supply demand analysis. We're going to do some consultation to help answer these key questions, also with council feedback, of course, and develop specific policies that we'll bring back for council consideration. And the outcomes of this, in the report, we do highlight that we're looking to pursue these policy options on a trial basis for the Coquitlam-Lougheed corridor. But the outcomes of this may inform rental policy elsewhere in the city and really help to support affordable living solutions for residents, where you're getting new rental housing in close proximity to rapid transit. They don't need to have a vehicle. That helps to reduce the cost of living expenses. Seems to be an optimal approach in terms of the investment that we're getting through the Evergreen line. So just wrapping up the presentation with talking about the next steps with the TDS process. Team's going to work to complete the strategy, and based on council feedback and how far we get with the parallel policy work that we're doing, we'd like to get the strategy document back in front of council before the summer break, and we'll also be working on getting these supplementary policies developed to the point where we can bring them back to council in the near future. Thank you.
Thank you very much. But Councillor Sikora.
Yeah, thank you very much. I've got a few questions. Number one, you used the word land lift in a couple of spots. What is land lift?
Through the mayor to Councillor Sikora, basically that's the increase in property value that's achieved through rezoning property from one use or zone to a use or zone that has a higher development potential.
So what you're saying, going into certain places and saying, okay, your house is worth, say, $500,000, we're going to buy certain things we're going to do, it'll increase the value of that house to $750,000?
Yeah,
what you're saying?
Yeah, basically it's if, let's say for example, you have a piece of property that has a building on it that has a density of 1. You can rezone it to a density of 2, and the increase of land value, because you get twice as much density, that's the land lift.
So then what you're doing, in fact, is creating a double whammy to where you'll never have affordable housing. Because what you're doing is creating a situation to where land is going to be almost impossible to create any other kind of housing but building for a high price kind of housing. If you start doing that, we did that in a couple of spots in Coquitlam, and it's now is a disaster of what we've got. See, okay. Now you said there was 150 people attended. There was 75 people that responded. I'd like to have seen those responses from those 75 people. What are they really saying? You know, because in here it's saying that 53% said retain or create rental housing. What, you know, I mean, that's what you're telling me. I'd like to have seen it in writing from the people that were there. What did they mean by that?
Through the chair, there were 2 types of questions on the comment form. One was ranking the scale of agreement, whether you agree or disagree that the city should play a role. With that particular question, there were also a couple lines that people could comment and clarify their response. There were some comments from those who agreed that the city should play a role and some that disagreed. It was provided as part of the council package in the council office, the verbatim comments, but with regards to those who disagreed with the approach, some of the ideas were related to the market playing a role or senior government playing a role in that.
And I noticed that you had 150 people attend. That's approximate. Or did you have a registry there where they registered?
Great question, through the chair. Okay. 150 people signed in. We actually anticipate we had quite a few more. There were a couple areas, particularly City Hall, where there were multiple entrances. We may have missed people,
and they all
so that's the minimum, yeah.
Where are they from? What area, Coquitlam, or were they not all from Coquitlam?
A good majority were from Coquitlam. We haven't done the actual mapping of those responses. Okay. But we do have the addresses available.
No, you know.
Actually, if I could just interrupt for a second, I'm advised that the actual responses are upstairs in, I assume, a binder in the council lounge, councilor's room upstairs in the office space.
One package, or where is it?
I assume it's a large package.
That's correct.
And we have one in my box.
Well, we didn't reproduce it without.
It was just one reproduction. Okay. Yeah. Okay. So then we're talking about, you know, we're talking always about bonus density. And the minute we give them bonus density, we want more money for the city. Okay? To me, you can have it both ways. You give bonus density maybe for them to create rental housing or something else, but you can't do both. Saying, oh, we'll give you another 4 stories. You give us $1 million or $1.5 million to the city, and that's fine. See? Those are wrong. You see what's happening. You'll never ever get anything happening here in the city as long as we have that attitude. That everything has to cost with bonus density and for certain reasons, not engraved in stone the reasons. I think it's very wrong. Also another thing, a developer comes in here, he wants higher density, and he wants to be 30% of parking relaxation. I mean, you know, give. And we'll take. But, you know, there's never anything to where we can say, get our teeth in to that something may be happening in this here city. We have them both ways. But I'll tell you, as long as we start charging high prices for our bonus density, we can only allow 4 stories on this building, but you give us another $1.5 million, and we'll give you 8 stories. What is in those 8 stories? The $1.5 million that's gone to the city? And the rest of it is for sold at a high market value, and that's what you're really creating here. So you know, and also parking relaxation. you know, every parking spot is about $40,000 to put in. We relax, say, 10, 15, 20 parking spaces. What happens to that money? Oh, we give them the breaks. What is it? It's another grab that we grab and take it for the city? What happens?
Maybe I could take a stab at this. You highlight a lot of really good issues, and at the end of the day, there are trade-offs with respect to all of these issues, and you're right, there is a limit. Any development needs to be profitable at the end of the day. The city has been actually very successful in the whole concept of bonus density, but you can't use it over and over again. You can't use it for different purposes. So there's trade-offs with respect to that, and there's trade-offs with respect to parking, how much of a relaxation to do parking in lieu, and all those kind of issues. All of those issues we still have to do more work on, and we'll have to come to grips with some of those issues in further work. What we're looking for today is simply some feedback, like you're giving, but from as many councillors as possible, on where in the compendium of issues is rental housing. How much of a priority should we put to that versus the other issues? Because you're right, we can only spend each dollar we raise through bonus density once, and if you use it for subsidizing rental housing or some other factors, it won't be available for other purposes. And what we're really looking for is just some initial reaction from council about where they would put the weight. And all of these issues will come back in further reports, but this is just the first opportunity for you to give some feedback in that regard.
Thank you very much, Peter. That's great. And you bottom contribution. You said voluntary contribution. What is that? What do you mean voluntary contribution on what?
Through the chair, both at our last time we were here, which was June 11th, we discussed the idea of a community amenity contribution, which at that time, as the General Manager of Planning and Development outlined, is a little bit tricky under current government regulations, but the idea is that you can establish a program where developers can consider contributing to local amenities in the area. We would establish that where density bonusing would not apply, in order to make sure that while density is a fabulous thing, you have to make sure you do density right. And the first step of that is making sure that we can provide the amenities in the area we need, and it would be part of that vehicle.
You know,
The issues that you did, Councillor Sikora, many years ago was a form of that, if you know what I mean. Like,
and that's exactly what I was going to bring up, Manager, is the fact that, you know what, we should maybe do away with all lot of these fluffy things we're doing that are not really, that are hurting certain areas and hurting many things in the community. We should go back to the days we were charging voluntary contribution by developers. As a matter of fact, it was Don Cunnings and myself started. It was $250 per lot that the developers contributed, and $250 per house that was built on that lot. And then if it's a commercial building, it was so much a square foot. And they liked it so much that they said, Mayor, we'd like to increase this to $450 per lot per house. And just think about how much money we would have had in the kitty today. But I went to Ottawa, and the mayor, Dan, that came after me, eliminated it. He said, we're not going to have that anymore. Well, that was a contribution by the developers that we could have many, many sports facilities in this city. We could have many, many rental housing. We may have many, many other things in this city if we continued in that path. And I think I'd like to ask our council members, maybe we should think about institute it again. You know, and I think that might be a much better way of going, because I'll tell you, we're bringing in tons of money into the city, and look at all the high rises are going up. Hundreds of them are going up. What, you know, we're building the high rises. Everybody may, I guess the developers make money, which is fine. I hope that they do. And what happens? The taxes keep going up. So where are we going? That's what I'm saying. I mean, and yet everybody wants to cover tennis courts. They want many, many other things. We're saying we don't have any money. So, you know, there's something wrong. Radically something wrong.
Well, just if I could comment on that, and I don't want to steal the planner's thunder, but we are basically doing that. It's slightly different words, it's described slightly differently, it's administered slightly differently, but we're basically doing exactly what you're talking about. We're raising money through an alternate technique, and that money is going to be available for a variety of things which council has to tell us what are the priorities. And really what we're trying to do today is determine how much of that money, how big of a piece of that pot should go to the rental housing piece.
That's exactly a problem. Therein lies the problem, because then you're going to get 9 different versions of 9 different ways, 9 different ways that you may want to do it. Those days, that money was earmarked for civic buildings and sports facilities, period. And you know something, you couldn't touch it for anything else. But now, I guess the way it is now, it's like a dog's breakfast, pardon my expression. So we need to get our teeth in to say, this is the way it's going to be, and either keep on going with this bonus density, earmark that money for something, and earmark it for every day that it happens, or do something, because I think the way it's going right now, they're coming for relaxation and parking. That saves millions of dollars. They're coming for, instead of 20 stories, they want 37 stories. And, you know, what are we coming out of that? Not a darn thing, just more traffic and more. And the next year, do I see my taxes going down? No, I see my taxes going up. So where are we benefiting?
Well, so the bonus density can't be used to reduce taxes, but are we collecting at least $450 a unit in these mechanisms, these alternative mechanisms, or what kind of scale or order of magnitude are these? Mr. McIntyre.
Thank you, Your Worship. Yes, and Councillor Sikora raised a number of good questions. Just very, very briefly, and as the City Manager alluded to, we have a system in place now, density bonusing. So what you see in the City Centre here with the high rises, when they go above a 2.5, that's when density bonusing kicks in. And that can be millions of dollars per site, per project. So, you know, the math works out pretty good per unit. What the density bonus, and by the way, density bonusing is allowed for in the legislation. We have a legal authority to put that in place. What is missed by density bonusing is the development at the lower end of the scale, the townhouses, the 2-, 3-story apartment buildings, and you know, unless you have a density of 0.2, you know, you can't apply a density bonusing system to that. And that's where the community amenity contribution approach kicks in. And there's a number of municipalities have put that in place. So that's what we're proposing here, is to look at that to, and it's interesting, it goes back to Councillor Sikora's previous system back in the day, where on a per unit basis there was contributions received. And so the CAC is a system to bring that back into place. So, and it's timely we're doing this now, because as we talked about, there's only so much demand you can place on the development community, and so all these various tools work together not to make the project unfeasible.
Well, yeah, and you know, the thing is, everything is okay, except that, you know, I'd like to see this all earmarked, engraved, installed by council members, okay, where that money shall go. See, another thing, years ago we had that $450 per unit. The developers were delighted to pay us. They were happy to come and present a check for $1 million at the podium. Because why? We had a policy, council member had a policy in those days, that from the time their application goes in, there's 6 months they get a building permit. See? So instead of them waiting 1.5 years, 2 years now, they get their building permit and everything in 6 months, instead of paying a year's extra interest at a bank, that neither the buyer or the developer or the city gains by it. The fact is, we produced a development permit, it went through rezoning and everything else in 6 months' time. They saved a lot of money in interest, so they're delighted to pay for the city. Who gained by it is our taxpayers gained by it. The way it is now, nobody's gaining anything. All we're losing. That's it. And that's all I have to say. Thank you.
I wonder, it raises a question, though. For example, the $450 wasn't a lawful fee. It was a kind of a different kind of fee, and we're empowered to do this. But are the funds for, say, the parking variances, or the if we implement that, or the funds for bonus densities, are they earmarked in some way to a specific kinds of, these specific types of investments? Mr. McIntyre.
Yes, thank you, Your Worship. That's a very good question. And now, Council will recall that the density bonusing system currently in place is for City Centre, and we went through that in a couple stages over the last couple of years. And yes, there is a structure where there's a density bonus is received at a decreasing percentage with each step up in density. And those funds received are allocated for amenities as defined in the City Centre Area Plan. And those amenities right now are broader amenities, projects, infrastructure, transportation type projects, and contributions towards the Affordable Housing Fund. So it's been Council's purview to establish how those funds will be targeted through the area and neighborhood plan processes.
And if I could just add on that, there is a body of work that we do need to do with Council at a future Council workshop, perhaps led by Sheena, in conjunction with the budget in terms of exactly what are the priorities in terms of what to spend that money on. Right now it's relatively loose, but this issue is going so quickly in a variety of areas that we have not had enough opportunity with Council to specify the priorities. As you recall, in the City Centre, we had the original system, and then we tweaked it basically to provide funds for additional transit-related stations and the like, and that's and there was some issues along those lines. That was the priority for the City Centre. In Coquitlam and in some of the other areas, the priorities will be different. We have a general policy or a general feeling that we should contribute back to the area in which the funds were raised as amenities to that area. But Council has a fair amount of flexibility with respect to how to spend that. And I think Councillor Sikora makes a good point that other than that general policy, there would be some benefits to being more precise with how we intend to spend that money. And that is a future piece of work that we'll have to do over the coming year.
Thank you.
Councillor Asmussen.
Oh, thank you. To get a response to some of your questions that you put forward, we were talking about land lift. Let's go with right now. We have a land lift, and we're talking about a portion of the land lift going into affordable housing. So we're only taking a portion of the land lift, not all of it. The question comes to me when we're talking about relocation approach, relocation assistance, then new rental units. So we're looking at taking probably funds for both of those out of the land lift. Is that what you're looking at?
Through the Mayor to Councillor Asmussen, the approach would be similar to the city's mobile home relocation policy for the relocation.
Great, because when we did that, when we went from 950 units up to 1,450 units, we used that lift to help with that funding. So that was to relocate, create the 60 units over there. So you're talking a blended approach. So because some people are thinking out there that all this funds will go to a certain amount of what I'd call scattered units within, because I'm glad you highlighted it. We can only do a small amount of creating new rental stock.
And it depends on what case it is, too.
What case it is.
Yeah.
And so when we take out of that for relocation, it shrinks our ability to invest in scattered units. So that's a concern when we look at that. I think, because I think right now we have a policy of, I think, half the density bonus going into amenities, half going into affordable housing policy. But I think people have to realize that that amount of money in the affordable is limited, and that's where we really have to leverage and partner. The one idea I've thought about along the North Road corridor, and it came up, I think, from a recent public hearing, or not a public meeting, is about rental units and stratas. Can we, along the North Road corridor, require that there can not be any restrictions on rental units along the North Road corridor for replacements in high-rises? Second to that, the most likely of rental units in a high-rise will be one bedroom. So if we take a high-rise units, we say, well, 30% have to be one bedroom, and there's no restriction on rentals. That's a way of the market creating rental units back in that area. Because when stratas put restrictions on 10%, I think, in the legislation, you got 90% of the building that can't be. And renters today in these market rentals along North Road are probably going to be at $900, $1,000. So you're not going to be a low income unless you get a safer program to bring that down. But it's a way of, my thought is, without the government agency, our funds, recreating market units through people investing in one-bedroom units. So it's just a thought for, I think, for you guys to take a look and consider how that would work. I like, Mr. McIntyre talking about the voluntary contribution program, and I think that's going to be coming back in more detail. I look at the Northeast, where you take the Smiling Creek, I think we're like 380 more density units of townhousing, but we're having difficulty for the amenities of the parks and funding that. And I think that voluntary contribution would help in those areas dealing with those amenity issues. So I'm looking for that, and I think that's a good way to come back. But I think I'd like to see potentially a one-to-one, or maybe going better than that, on the rental use for that area, or all the areas. But once again, I think we have to, before we go down this, we have to find out what's the level of commitment from our other agencies, federal, provincial, what's available to us when we put together a plan moving forward, and what are their commitments to work with us. Because if they're not going to commit to work with us, we're going to really struggle, and we're not going to meet the expectations, I think, what the public expects out there. And there is a need for rental units throughout the community now. So I think we want to be creative. We want to replace that rental units, but at the same time, we don't want to stagnate the potential development along there. So it's a real balancing act. But I think, like I say, allowing in our planning more one-bedrooms and no restrictions on rentals can help in an area creating a market base where people are buying units for rental and making their revenue creating an issue. But I do think, my personal opinion is we have to look at a way of creating at least what we have there now. And then we have to look at what programs, because a lot of those people in there might market rental, but they are a lower income area. So what's the provincial government's willing to extend the SAFER program into these, and what other programs would be able to offset between a market rate and these people in that area? And I know for scattered units, there's a lot of agencies willing to manage those through agreements of housing agreements also to help manage that issue.
Okay. And just a quick response, the use of housing agreements can help in that regard in terms of the one bedroom and the restrictions.
Yeah. Thank you.
On a case-by-case basis, of course. Yeah.
Thank you. I have myself on the list. I have a couple of concerns. Most of my concerns center on the rental replacement side of things. There are some proposals here, or even some discussion points related to the one-to-one requirement for rental replacement and such. But it obviously only applies to people that have had rental housing, have owned rental housing. And I've always fundamentally objected to the idea that if you ever build rental housing, you'll be punished in the future if you need to, if your building has become at such an age or whatever that it needs to be replaced, you'll be punished, and there'll be no barrier whatsoever put on the person that, or the individuals that decided to develop a different kind of building or didn't build rental housing. It's in many ways the same discussion that we have about tree retention. If I planted a tree in my front yard 15 years ago, it's now of a size that it is protected under our tree bylaw. But if I hadn't planted it, I wouldn't have any onus on me to plant a tree. It does tend then to penalize those that, or put the onus rather on the urban forest on those that planted trees, but no onus on those that didn't. And the same challenge with rental housing. So I'm wondering how other communities have worked their way through that, rather than putting all of the onus on those that have provided rental housing for the last decades and none of it on other types of residential buildings. Is it possible to spread that public good, the requirement for the provision of a public good, out more broadly on all development, for example?
Yeah, through to the Mayor, I think the simplest answer to that one would be that a lot of other municipalities use density bonusing contributions to fund affordable housing funds, that funds from those are then used to develop affordable housing in those cities. And yeah, there are cases in other cities where there are properties that have rental on it. There are approaches that are agreed to between the city and the developer to replace the rental units that are on those sites, either on site or elsewhere. So there's a mix of both approaches throughout the region.
Okay, I'll probably come back, but I'll let the rest of council deal with. Councillor O'Neill.
Yes, thank you. Before we proceed any further, I'd like to just get clarification on something that Councillor Asmundson brought up. Talked about an existing policy that I'm still learning all the ropes here, that shows that sees half of, was it density bonusing going to affordable housing and half to amenities? Can you explain that and how that works and yeah, just some detail on how that works?
Through the chair, yeah, thanks, Councilman, for that question. I was going to clarify on that point. The C4 city center density bonusing system currently in place starts at 2.5, goes up to 5. And I believe it's the 3.5 to 4 step. It's a 0.5 FAR step. In the original density bonusing system, half of that went to the Affordable Housing Reserve Fund and half of that went to community amenities. So when the C4 density bonusing system was updated a couple of years ago, that step remained. So that revenue that was received before continued on into those two pots. The other density bonusing steps went to the other community amenities, particularly the transit infrastructure that was required. So that's the system in place for city center. So when depending on what you hear from council today, when we come back with a suggested policy for Coquitlam, that can be modified or not.
How exactly is the part of the funds that going into for the reserve fund for affordable housing, how is that utilized at present?
Your Worship, right now they're going into a fund, and as the city manager says, we're due for a review of that and the bigger policy piece around affordable housing, and we need to have that discussion and direction.
Up until now, we have not spent any of that funding. And so the money is in a fund, and council will be given an opportunity in the future in terms of exactly how to spend that and allocate that out.
So there's been no discussion or no decision on what it was supposed to be for, like council builds its own building, subsidizes something, all that. That's all up. It's all up in the air, is it? And so therefore, it's all up in the air for Coquitlam as well. Okay.
Actually, I know there's at least a couple of council members who believed that to some degree we were replenishing the money that had been, or the value that had been given by virtue of the free 70-year leases on two city properties to fund, essentially to support provincial housing programs, given that that wasn't our, it's not our mandate, it's not our role to fund either the 500 block Como Lake or the 3030 Gordon properties, and we have given both of those up. So my own understanding in supporting the affordable housing thing was that's part of its role was to do that. So when Mr. Seblin says we haven't spent any of it, I might take issue a little bit. We spent about $3 million on land to support provincial housing projects.
But what we haven't done is we haven't transferred the funding from the one reserve to the other reserve, which would implement that. And so we still have to do a formal allocation process, and I agree with you, a number of council members have made those comments and whatever, but we haven't actually brought the issue in an actionable form to council in terms of transferring between those reserves.
Sorry, that was a matter of clarification.
Wow, what a big, very big, interesting and important subject. We were talking about what to do around Coquitlam, especially rental housing, but this is a much broader question, obviously. And I don't think we're going to be able to, I just have a hunch that over the next 3.5 weeks, you want to get this all finished before the summer break as part of the TDS going forward. I don't think it's going to happen. There's a lot of very important issues here.
We will not be finishing this piece. There's a number of things that we are going to be able to finish, and perhaps, Carl, you should elaborate that a little bit. I don't want to steal all your thunder. I just wanted to make sure it was clear that there are some pieces that we can do and some pieces that are much bigger issues like this one. We simply want to start the discussion today to see, to get any kind of feedback from council we could to help us in formulating the policy as we go. What we originally said when we started this whole TDS program is we would have rather waited and not allowed the development to proceed as fast as what the development community wanted to. Clearly, there was a desire both in the development community and in council to allow some developments to go ahead. And so we had to develop a system of somehow capturing what an appropriate funding source, bonus density, or whatever it was called, to allow some developments to go forward faster than it would have otherwise been. And then we can take our time filling in the dots later in terms of how to spend the money. Do you want to spend it on a new community center or a new parking garage or some rental housing or some other things? Those are much bigger issues, and they will take some time. But perhaps, Carl, you could just give us an advance peek at what your anticipated schedule is. Carl has just started. He's full of energy.
Yeah,
so
I'm not sure if we actually need that. I mean, there's a lot of councillors have questions here, and I want to try to keep it moving forward. So maybe as the opportunity arises, but I'd like to get some of my thoughts on the record here before we get sidetracked again on that, okay? Because, by the way, it's too bad that Mr. Trasolini left, because I know at the beginning of your report you reported about people liking the image of Newport Village, and I think that's the second time we've heard that in the last couple of weeks, because when we asked for public feedback on Partington Creek, didn't they say that they liked the image of Newport Village as well? So he could have taken a bow out there. So we're getting a pretty clear message that Newport Village worked pretty well. So going forward in the TDS, the first part of this discussion, I think we're getting a good message about what people like, what works, and we've got a great example in our neighboring community, of which Mr. Trasolini was mayor for so many years. But yes, let me move right into the rental housing strategy. I guess I've got two big points, and I can talk about them in detail a little later. One big point is, when reading this, I kept thinking of the impact that some of these ideas would have on the cost of an individual unit that somebody wants to buy in the area. And insofar as some of these things contemplate extracting things from developers in exchange for something, the developers aren't going to eat that. They're going to pass that on in some way. And during the campaign last fall, it seems like a long time ago now, every one of us talked about affordable housing, and we talked not just about rental, not just about low income, but housing costs for the average family, the average couple, the average individual. And I just started seeing dollar signs added in several places here, and I was really worried. Dollar signs added to the final sale price of the condominiums that will be sold in this area if we try to extract too much. The second general idea I had was you can't have your cake and eat it too, and that has to do with the amenities, whether it's amenities or affordable housing from the density bonusing. Yeah, I think Councillor Sikora talked about this in his comments, that and it certainly suggested a basic issue here that we've been hearing for months now when we talk about the Coquitlam area, especially about the need for amenities there, and make sure if you're developing you've got to have amenities. Well, if we start contemplating shifting shifting that money into subsidizing or supporting somehow rental housing, then that density money, that density bonusing money that or the voluntary fund, or whether it's part of the formal strategy that was thought that was going to be going to amenities, will start diminishing, correct? I mean, it's just the pie is only so big right there. So I'm concerned about that. And I know we're rushing ahead on this, and just in a few more detailed comments. Boy, I spent a lot of time on Friday and over the weekend and again this morning looking at this. This is a huge subject, a very important, a very big subject. And I came across a series of columns that Vancouver Sun's urban affairs writer, Bob Bransford, has written. One of the municipalities download debt to new homeowners, home buyers rather. Very interesting subject here, which is directly apropos to what we're talking about right now, in that if we adopt some of these things that are going to force developers to pay for these, for all the amenities and force developers to pay for all the rental subsidies, what we end up doing is actually forcing the debt onto the buyers of the condos, because the developers pass on those charges. People have to take out bigger mortgages, and that's a very inefficient way of doing this. It's almost like I think he was essentially arguing that we're shirking our responsibility a bit there by forcing condo buyers to shoulder that debt. Here's another headline: cities' hidden taxes contribute to the lack of affordable housing. And that's the same essential thing, that it's these sorts of programs have the ultimate effect of driving up the cost of housing. Wow, kind of ironic, while we're talking about essentially trying to find affordable housing for renters, the actions we take could have the unintended consequence, and likely will, of driving up the cost of the for sale condominiums, and that's something that I don't think is good. Development charge debate is overdue, and it's time the public joined in the affordable housing debate. So, yeah, I guess, as Councillor Secor talked about this a bit in his comments about wanting to know how many people actually talked about this issue and what they were saying. Yeah, it's very easy to say, yeah, let's protect the rental housing, but boy, oh boy, it's a tougher thing when we want to figure out how we're going to get that money, how much market force we want to allow to take place. I mean, if we just let the market run free here, maybe there won't be any rental housing built to replace existing rental housing. Maybe the people will be having to move out to Abbotsford or Chilliwack or something. And as you pointed out, we have a strategy in place now that two parts of our strategy, various strategies you showed there that talked about how different policies we have, rather, talked about how, well, no, the city does see rental housing as important and protection of it. So, so obviously there's an expectation, and former councils have said that we should be doing something about this. Exactly what it is, I'm not prepared to make a decision on today. You're certainly getting part of my feedback, and that's what really generally you wanted. I do like the ideas, just a more general feedback here about less restrictive parking requirements for rental people, for rental buildings, and that certainly would make sense, especially if it's right near a SkyTrain station. We might also, speaking of parking, might want to look at lifting our parking requirement rules for secondary suites. If there's secondary suites near SkyTrain stations or SkyTrain lines, I believe our current policy talks about a legal secondary suite has to have designated parking for that. Maybe we want to say, if you're pretty close to the SkyTrain station, have a secondary suite without parking. So that might be a possibility as well. That's not even mentioned in this, but there's lots of ways for people. When there's a demand, if it's easy enough, people will find a way of filling that demand. So there's one thing there. I know the city has a strategic investment advisory committee. I'd love to hear what this high-level committee thinks about about this whole issue. It's fundamental to the direction that we're going to be taking in the next several years. I don't know if I don't.
We certainly can put it on a future agenda. Certainly that we utilize that committee for a variety of sounding board, and it's not a decision body, but they give us feedback, just like we're getting feedback today.
Yeah.
And we can certainly put that on a future agenda item.
Now, you know, on all of this, of course, you mentioned about partnerships with senior governments. Senior governments have a huge role here, and it's not just a role in granting money for things, and they've got legislative roles as well. At the provincial level, we still have rent control, although it's a very kind of a liberal sort of rent control. For those not familiar, it's inflation plus 2% is the amount of rent increase you're allowed to have every year. Perhaps that's standing in the way of more rental housing being built. I don't know. Maybe that's something we should be talking to the provincial government about. I don't know the exact state of the federal taxation laws regarding capital gains and things like that, but I know that there was a big concern about 10 years ago regarding how the federal taxation policy was actually standing in the way of rental housing. So maybe that's something we want to bring up with our Member of Parliament. One final comment. I've been going on and on, but you wanted the feedback. Thank you. I love hearing applause for whatever reason. Is that I learned actually just this morning that Richmond, actually a developer in Richmond who was building some market condominiums was able to build a purpose-built 80-unit rental building recently. With no special incentives or anything, but then when it came to the City Hall, they wanted from this developer $1,400 a unit contribution to their affordable housing fund, and which would have killed the project. Now, talk about irony. So I hope we don't have anything like that there, that when we do get somebody wanting to build a purpose-built, not strata, building, that all the rules we have for density and contributions for this and that don't kick in there. We have to be able to be flexible enough, and it's a word you've been using, to make sure that we don't ask them for the same pound of flesh that we ask for the people that are building condominiums. The developer was able to negotiate his way out of that $1,400 a unit. I see it's bringing a smile to some of the faces over here, but that's what actually happened. So concerns, I think you've heard them. Dealing again, I'll just summarize with what the impact of some of this was going to be on the person who wants to buy in the area. If it's going to drive up the price $5,000 or $10,000, holy mackerel, what a big concern that is. And again, we really have to take a hard look, obviously, at what we're going to do with the density bonusing, and that's a whole other big discussion. So we've got a lot of work to do, and thank you for presenting this today and giving us all this work.
If I may, Mr. Mayor, through to Councillor O'Neill, just a few comments. Absolutely, there needs to be a balance between the provision of new rental units and ensuring that transit-oriented development around the Evergreen line is viable and affordable for everyone. You know, again, a flexible approach where there's use of incentives. You know, the federal government, absolutely, we have to find ways to partner with them, and there could be rental supplements that could be provided. You know, in addition to grants, there's a lot of opportunities there. And you know, when you speak about purpose-built standalone buildings, yes, that's something that we definitely want to pursue. And I think that you know, when you're talking about what can the city do in terms of helping to incentivize that, on page 7, when we're talking about those flexible rental housing solutions, the first bullet, it says that if rental units are provided on site, a portion of the land lift contribution could be waived and rental floor space could be exempted. So we wanted to make sure that that's something that we're looking at. And in terms of process, we need to do, obviously we're going to hear the feedback, and so the feedback that you're giving to us today, we're going to do a rental supply and demand analysis based on population projections. We're going to do further consultation and come up with specific policies that we'll bring back to Council in the fall.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Robinson.
Thank you. Well, I want to acknowledge Councillor O'Neill's comments about, what are people going to do? They're going to move further and further out. And it's interesting that he used that statement, because this morning on CBC Radio, they were talking about this very issue about rental challenges in city centres and how it's forcing in Toronto, Vancouver, and Halifax, how it's pushing people further and further away. And they're the people who can least afford to move further and further away because they have no access to transit. So it becomes this never-ending cycle and comes with its own set of challenges. One of the things that I think is really important to consider when we're looking at rental is who it is that lives in Coquitlam. And so I think the rental supply and demand piece is critical. And I went back to our affordable housing strategy because it actually has a fabulous sort of two-pager. It's a little out of date, but it really was very good in just providing some community profile. And I would encourage the rest of council to pull that up. It's just, and it talks about the fact that we have 55% of all of our multifamily market housing. The rental, 55% of it is in this area. 28% of our low-income individuals, based on 2001, live there. We have over 5,000 people whose income is considered by Stats Canada to be low income. So it's a real challenged neighborhood in terms of housing. And I always wonder, when the change comes, where are those people going to go? And these are the people who most need to be along a transit line, because we want them to participate in the economy. And in order to participate in the economy, you need some decent housing. In order to participate in the economy, you need to be able to move around the system, move to jobs, have easy access to your children who are back home, all that kind of stuff. So I think we owe it to those citizens who live there to make sure that we have an appropriate response so that they're not displaced and have to move to Abbotsford or Chilliwack, where their quality of life is going to be certainly impacted. And the other thing that's, I think, really interesting in terms of purpose-built rental starts, and I get this information from the Tri-Cities Homelessness Task Group, did an all-candidates briefing session, and they have some fabulous data in there, that 2010 we had 50 purpose-built rentals, and in 2005, 2 units, but other than that, in the last 10 years, nothing. So if we got what Richmond got, I'd be like doing the happy dance. So that would be great. My perspective is I think we actually need to increase the rental stock, and it's a range of rental. So I'm not talking about low-cost rental. I'm talking about the whole range, because we've also got some data that talks about the rental household income by income group of 2006 for Coquitlam. Household income $70,000 and over, we've got like 17% people rent. So we're not talking about low income. We're talking about that there are people who don't want to own homes. And as I think about as I age, I'm thinking, I might want to move in that direction too. So, and we're growing. And so I think, and we're aging. So I actually think we would have a missed opportunity by not increasing our rental stock. Now, how to get there, that's where you guys do your magic and abracadabra. But so, you asked the question, I'm giving you my thoughts. I also think that, when we talk about partnerships, I don't think it's just with senior levels of government. I think we need to open the door as broadly as we can to partnerships. And partnerships can come from the most unusual places, whether it's from a nonprofit or some foundation or I don't know. But I think partnerships, we need to be as open as possible to looking at some creative, ingenious ways of doing some fabulous housing. There's a group called Housing Options or something from Toronto, and they're a nonprofit that looks at keeping affordable home ownership affordable, and I don't know exactly how you do it. There's a whole mechanism for how they mortgage it out, and a certain percentage of the mortgage keeps rotating around, and they actually have investors who lock their money into this kind of scheme that just keeps affordable home ownership affordable. So there's a whole bunch of stuff that you can do, where a percentage of the built equity goes back to the investor, but a portion goes back into the house, into the housing. So there's all kinds of real creative ideas out there, and I'd really like to see us look at some of that for this neighborhood. Another idea that comes from Michael Geller is the lock-off, what he calls the lock-off suites. He calls them basement suites in the sky. I don't know if you're familiar with what he's done at University. Right, so that's really interesting. So you're a condo owner, and there's this other portion that you can either, of your suite, that you can either keep it, or you can rent it off. It actually locks off and has a separate entrance and a little bathroom and a little kitchen area that is perfect for SFU students. I mean, it's right on that bus line. It's like that's a whole area of what we'd call low-income folks, although, you know, my kid thinks he's not, but he really is. Acts like he's not. But those are some real, I think, creative ideas that we ought to be looking for Coquitlam. And finally, one of the thoughts that I have, and this is where it comes down to the density bonus, you know, amenities or affordable housing, amenities or affordable housing. And one of the things that I struggle with is developers put into their lovely buildings, they put in these private amenities. Right, so it's the pool and the workout room and the gathering place, and most of them that I look at, my in-laws are in, and my parents are in one, and it's like, and they're empty. They are empty amenities because they're not programmed. And I actually think that they actually contribute to what the Vancouver Foundation talks about, isolationism, that we're really starting to see. And I would encourage developers to stop doing that. The money that goes into your private amenities, put that into the community amenity so that your residents that you're building this for, they benefit by a shared amenity that is programmed, because that's what people need to be less isolated. So I haven't talked to developers about that, but I see that as a bigger part of a bigger issue. And even Polygon over here, they've hired a programmer for their Windsor Gate because they were recognizing that if you don't program it, nothing happens. And so so it's become a bit more of a public amenity in some ways. So I think that there might be a way to do both, and if we can talk with the development community about how they might be interested in supporting that. So like my other colleagues, I'm not ready to make any decisions. I generally like what I see, but I do think that we are not developing this neighborhood for today. We're developing it for the next 20 years. And so we have to have a bit of a crystal ball and anticipate what the community is going to need. And I think that just simply replacing is not going to be adequate. I think we need to think about how do we increase the stock. Thanks.
Thank you. Councillor Reamer.
Thank you very much. One of the interesting things in your report was that 31% disagreed with using developer contributions for amenities. And I'm wondering if, I have not had a chance to look at the feedback forms upstairs, I'm wondering if we had any idea why that was.
Through your worship, that particular question did not have a comment field.
It didn't. Okay.
It didn't.
Okay.
So there isn't an extensive list of feedback on that one. The one thing I might note is that it was a link between increasing density and using those contributions for amenities. So it may have been some of the folks who may be not as comfortable with the density.
Okay. Okay. That's very helpful. Thank you. I noted your 4 or 5 options with respect to developers having to do a rental housing strategy, municipal developer agreement, density bonusing, which we're already familiar with. And Mayor Stewart asked the question, and I want to extend that question to some of the other options. Are other municipalities doing these other options that you've provided other than density bonusing, and how are they working? And I noted in your presentation the use of best practice, and so I'm assuming that you're looking around at other municipalities for this.
Yes, through the mayor to Councillor Reamer. Yes, for example, the relaxation of parking requirements is being used in other municipalities. to great effect on some projects. Density bonusing, housing agreements are used in many municipalities to ensure that rental units are kept for the long term. Yes, and strategies in terms of, you have rental units on your property, you want to rezone, what's your plan, and how are you going to assist in the relocation of those renters. And in Vancouver, for example, with some of the rental housing initiatives that they have there, the incentives that are offered by the city to developers have been helpful in terms of getting rental housing built.
Right. I guess one of my concerns in seeing these and not knowing whether they're working in other municipalities is that so we're going to create a new list of rules for developers, obviously, with respect to this rental housing stock, if we were to ask them, for instance, to do a rental housing strategy. And here at the city, we've been trying to streamline our processes. We've been trying to make it easier. And so I think it's really important that we have the rules put in place ahead of time so that they know what the rules are before they come in here. So I think that's a very important component. I, too, am very concerned about the fact that if we start taking all these contributions from developers, it's only going to increase the cost of housing. And so we already know that people in our community are spending way more on their housing than they should be, more than their 30%. The cost of housing seems to be going up and up and up, and so there is that very fine balancing act. I agree with Councillor O'Neill that has to take place, because we don't want to do all this at the expense of increased housing costs, basically. So I'm fully supportive. I really hesitate to say we want to target rental housing stock at this particular point in time. I know I don't have enough information on which to support that. Maybe I would say, for instance, as Councillor Asmussen stated, one-on-one. But I'm not sure I want to say at this point increase it. I don't have that information. I look forward to you doing your analysis on demand and supply, and that'll be an interesting piece of information for that. But right at the moment, I need some further information to be able to tell you what I want to do on that particular issue. Thank you.
Your Worship, if I could just respond to some of the questions from Councillor Reamer. Good points. Before we get into any of these policy areas, we always do what I call scan the dial, check around. And that's why I say it's helpful having people new to the city, too. They come to us with other experiences from other municipalities. So we check with best practices, not just in the Lower Mainland, but also we look a little further afield, too. The second thing we do is we do kind of a risk analysis or tolerance around these pieces. We have both upfront informal discussions with members of the development community, people doing development in Coquitlam. Through these processes, we will be coming forward as the various policies are drafted for Council's consideration, and if Council feels comfortable with it, we would be taking that out to the development community. And that's been kind of the hallmark of our approach to date. And I think certainly the feedback I've been getting from people like the Urban Development Institute that the City of Coquitlam's system for density bonusing is superior to others around the Lower Mainland. I think they appreciate our sort of upfront and very clear, and I think they find it to be a reasonable approach. And so certainly it would be my intention as we go forward in providing additional policy tools that I would like to see those received in the same way. And I think at the end there's benefit too, because now we've got this suite of policies. So in the end, what is the overall net impact of that? And it can't be overwhelming. It has to all work together, or we're going to be jeopardizing development in our community.
That does make me feel better. Thank you. The other last issue I wanted to talk about was the role of senior governments, and I really think that they have a huge role to play. As we all know, we get 8 cents of every tax dollar. That's not a lot. We seem to be dealing every time the federal government changes legislation. Sometimes that impacts us, and so I really think that provincial and federal governments have a role to play in all of this, and I think that we always need to keep that in mind before we take things on wholeheartedly. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Hodge.
Yes. and I know we've spent a lot of time here today talking on the rental housing side of things, and that concerns me. So I'm going to start first on page 4 of the report. It mentions rental housing, and this is sort of, I guess, also in line with Councillor Bremer's question earlier on the amenities. I noticed that under E, it said over half the respondents indicated support for the city playing a role in retaining or creating rental housing in station areas, but staff noticed that approximately 30% of respondents disagree with this approach. And again, do we know why? Is it just they don't feel it's the city's role, or they just don't want rental housing in the area, or do we have a sense of what that pushback? And I'm also concerned that only 53% indicated support, and it looks like 30% were outright disagreeing with it.
Through the chair, yeah, there were a number of written comments provided for those who responded both with agree, strongly agree, neutral or disagree, or strongly disagree for each of the categories. The written feedback for those who responded with disagree or strongly disagree were fewer in number. There were a fair number that did agree or strongly disagree that provided comments as well. Doing a very brief synopsis of where some of those key messages were coming out. First, recognizing that there's not a lot of comment there, but of those, the key themes were looking at senior government role and the market as playing a role in providing rental housing. And those would be the only real themes that were emerging. There were some other independent comments.
Okay.
I think further to that, without the benefit of commentary before that question, I think it almost through the question, is Coquitlam doing this on their own?
Right.
And like we said at the beginning, we can't do it on our own. That's for sure.
No, and my concern would be that with development pressures, in particular in the Coquitlam neighborhood, the potential to lose what I think it's read somewhere, it's almost a quarter of our rental is right in that neighborhood. So for potential to take a huge hit just from one development is very concerning. At the same time, those buildings that were built 40 years ago and primarily serve a purpose as a rental were built in a very different time when there were other programs in place and things. And so today's housing market and financing, everything is such that it's very different today. And going into newer buildings where there's a reluctance from builders to put in rental, primarily because they can get their money out faster selling it at market rate. So I think that this is really concerning as to how we are going to encourage that. I appreciate that there are some potential tools that we have that can encourage it. And I'll talk about parking in a minute further, but I see that parking is one of them. I agree that if there's a chance to reduce some parking in certain areas to put money into rental, that makes sense. One of the terms that I've used a couple of times discussing housing here is not affordable housing, but it's what I refer to as affordable living. And that, creating rental stock is one thing, but creating affordable rental stock is another issue, and probably a bigger issue. And creating homes where people can live and afford to live, and this is where my point about affordable living comes in, that we have opportunities in Coquitlam that we don't have, say, in Burke Mountain, because Burke Mountain, family moving up there, they've got to buy one car, maybe two cars. And next to housing, running, owning, and operating a car is your next biggest expense. So if we can create housing in areas where they don't need to buy cars, that goes a long way to contributing to affordable living. So I think we've got the right idea, the right spot, but the flip side is that these are the very neighborhoods and areas where land is on the most pressure for uplifting. And so the challenge becomes to take advantage of an opportunity to provide affordable living, but make sure that it remains affordable. And my concern would be if we were to give a break, for example, on parking at possibly $40,000 a stall, making sure that money or that savings is passed on to the end unit. And Councillor O'Neill is quite correct when he says that if we start adding all the charges, those charges get passed on to the end buyer. But I want to make sure that if we start providing savings, that those savings get passed on to the end buyer or renter. And the challenge will be that as the unit changes hands, that market forces don't dictate that there's a lift in the value. And so that if we create units that sell for $30,000 less because we gave breaks on parkings, that in 5 years somebody doesn't turn around and say, well, all the other units in Coquitlam are selling for $350,000, so suddenly this one jumps to $350,000. So I want to make sure that these savings are somehow not lost to market forces, because then the end loser is the citizens of Coquitlam, who provided funding into affordable rental facilities in exchange for giving up on, say, amenities. Because this is, the councillors that spoke are quite right. There's a limit to how much a developer can contribute. And we're hearing from residents now saying, we want amenities, we want amenities. So if we cut back on the amount of money we request for amenities and put that into affordable housing and into rental, I want to make sure that rental remains affordable. Otherwise, we would have been better to put that money into amenities for the good of the entire community. So I think the challenge is to create rental, make sure it remains affordable, and that it remains affordable in the future. That there isn't a lift to somebody else down the road. So I definitely want to see more rental, and I want to make sure that it's affordable. Some of the other things in the plan, I think we've talked at great length. My big thing of no surprise is parking, and getting away from the rental side of things. If we do decide that there's an opportunity to reduce parking in the transit area, that money is put into a fund, because I do think we're going to need parking in these areas. If not in the residential area, we're going to need it on the commercial side. And so I think we want to make sure that we retain that and find the mechanism. And I know this has been covered in the parking strategy, but I want to emphasize again that, to me, parking is important, and making sure that that's retained. But if there's an opportunity to transfer some of that into savings into rental units, I'm willing to look at that, just as I'm willing to look at the reduction of some amenity bonusing in terms of putting that into rental. But again, if I'm giving that up, I want to make sure that it's in the mix and that it's of benefit to the people who really need it, because I'm really big on affordable living, and that goes for young families starting out, as well as people who may have some income challenges. I think we have to make sure that we cater to all people who want to come and live in Coquitlam. I was happy that Councillor Robinson raised the issue of the lock-off suites, because I think that this is a really novel way of bringing extra units online, just as we've seen in our neighborhoods where people have put secondary suites into their basement. Those have created, they have filled a need in the community, both for people that need help with purchasing the home. It becomes a mortgage helper, but it also does provide rental stock. And I think that we're seeing a different type of housing when we go into the transit-oriented. We're not going to see single-family homes with basement suites, but what we may see is apartments with secondary suites. And I think this is, and I've talked to a couple of developers about it, and I like it, and I particularly like it in the Coquitlam area, because I think it's a natural for students in the SFU area. So I think that is something to be explored. With that, of course, will come some parking challenges, but we can possibly address those and the overall. So generally, I think we're going in the right direction. I can see tons of work still to do, lots of questions still to be asked and answered, and I'm grateful that we're having this dialogue, and I look forward to giving further comments in the future. Thank you.
Go right ahead.
Through the Mayor to Councillor Hodge, just a couple quick comments. The idea of reducing parking requirements could be utilized in a number of different scenarios. One potential example, if there's a purpose-built rental building, having a parking relaxation on those units would serve as an incentive by reducing the development cost of those units. And talking about ensuring that those rental units that are newly developed, that they maintain their rental status or their level of affordability over time, again, is using housing agreements. Would be a good way to help facilitate that.
Yeah, good. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Nicholson.
Thank you. I'm going to restrain my Irish loquaciousness and try and see to it that Councillor O'Neill and I, between us, deliver average length homilies.
Well, okay. Well, thank you very much. Our next speaker is.
So I just want to make a couple of points. We're talking about the Affordable Housing Fund, created out of some of our density bonusing. It was identified at a time when we were in the position that we are still in. We believe that we need to support affordable housing, affordable living, and we believe that we should set aside some money towards that end. We don't really know how we're going to spend the money. We don't know how we're going to accomplish what it is that we want to do, but we do know that we won't do it if we don't have some money for it. And so we set that aside some time ago. We're now hearing conversations suggesting that that money is there really to replace the land that we've already allocated to some forms of affordable housing or supported living. My view is that the two projects that we've supported, 528 Como, 3030 Gordon, were decisions made on our response to the needs of the community and on our opportunity to lever other governments. Notice I'm not saying senior governments, other governments. We had the chance to do something for some people. We made that decision. At the time, we didn't contemplate replacing the value of the land that we were giving up for a period of 60 years or whatever. We simply did what was the best thing we could do at the time to get the best thing for the people who needed what needed to be done. So any conversation about how we ultimately utilize the funds that we've set aside and are continuing to set aside for affordable housing remains to happen. And I expect those funds to be used to produce more and better opportunities for people, not to cover off the costs of things that we've already done and had the credit for. The next one I have is I don't really expect a response. I suspect that planning is a lot like auditing, and I used to say I love teaching auditing because all the questions have the same answer, and the answer is it depends. And I think that the same answer applies to many of the questions around planning. The one that has come to my mind frequently over the last several years, listening to debates here and in other places, is in the land development, the real estate development business, marketing homes, do the input costs drive the pricing, or does the market determine the pricing? Any developer, like any businessman, seeks to minimize their costs and maximize their prices. The idea that by adding costs, to my mind, putting the costs of providing the services that will support the marketability of the project where they belong with the project, but that's another it depends. But doing that does not drive the price up. The price is the price. A 3,200 square foot, 3-bedroom legal basement suite on Burke Mountain, halfway up the mountain with no transit, has a value. It will sell for X, and it'll sell for X whether or not there's $15,000 of amenity charges related to the lot or not. But that's my view. I suspect that there is no definitive answer. Probably the real answer is that, yes, the market sets the prices, but the input costs have something to do with it too, and there's certainly a point at which you don't build. But I'd really like us to come to grips with that question so that we don't have to ask it over and over again. Thank you. I wasn't really done, but I wanted to catch the mayor off guard.
You did. Gretchen is back. Councillor Sikora.
Yeah, thank you very much. You know, the one thing we got to get grips with, you know, I mean, one thing I got to make sure of that, I would never, ever support the city building affordable housing. I can tell you, it's not our role. The role is the federal provincial government. The fact is that I'll tell you something, all you got to do is phone any city in Ontario. They took on the role of building affordable housing. Their sidewalks are falling apart. Their sewer is falling apart. All other pipes are falling apart. They have no money. I mean, very, very simple. Phone Ontario. Any city in Ontario will tell you that. Matter of fact, I spoke to Joe Fontana, who's a friend of mine. He's in London, Ontario, the new mayor of London, Ontario. He tells me the same story. But, you know, the one thing about it, that, you know, we talked about strata council, and people don't want to own a home. I'm one of them that doesn't want to own a home, although I do own a home, but I don't live in it. But I chose to live in a place with strata council. Now, you know, you talk about rentals. In our unit, there's 190 units. There's only 5 that are allowed for rentals, period. And if you and the only way you can get another rental unit, because it creates a hardship for you, and you have to rent it. Otherwise, the strata council will say no. And I can tell you right now, the strata councils, not that they're against rental people, but it doesn't fit into their package. Number one, we all pay maintenance fees. Okay? When you add on the maintenance fee, that may be X amount of dollars. Where I live, it's $325 a month. Mind you, we do have a very, very good contingency fund, a very healthy contingency fund. But, you know, the one thing about it, there's maintenance fees that got to be paid, and then what happens if the roof starts leaking? It's $1 million. Okay? How are they going to pay for it? They're going to give each unit an assessment. Would it be $20,000, $30,000, $15,000 paid up right now? Can you afford to rent those units? I don't think so. I don't think so. The rent is out of sight then. You couldn't do it. So, you know, I mean, these are things that do happen, you know, and
actually, why don't we take
I know that we have now, you know, that we're putting the money into general fund and the affordable housing. Who are you going to give it to, the affordable housing fund? You give it to Boza, to Polygon, to Beatty, to Westport? Who are you going to give it to? And have a big cry by the other developers. You know, we gave away 2 pieces of land for affordable housing and other things. And that's fine. We gave away that land, but that land somehow has to be paid for. You know, it's $1 for 60 years, big deal. You know, and it serves a purpose, and that's fine. That's, you know, we haven't had too many screams at from the people that that's what we're doing. But can you imagine us starting to give land for free to a developer to build affordable housing when we're subsidizing Metro Vancouver 3,800 or 4,000 units? Each taxpayer in this community is subsidizing the affordable housing in Metro Vancouver. Not going to be subsidizing something else in the city. Not a chance in the world. And there, it's really, really got me going when somebody thinks that for some ungodly reasons that we should start right away, put millions of dollars away, and forget about our amenities that we have to pay, forget about our roads, forget about our sewers, forget about everything else, just build social housing, social housing, social housing. I don't think it's going to work. I'm one that cannot support something like that. So I can imagine, Mr. Stablin, and when we're going to discuss this money in the next few weeks, I hope you put away 48 hours, because that's what it'll take, and bring a whole bunch of boxing gloves with you. Okay, because that's what we'll need. Okay, thank you very much.
And don't have any of your reasons be those ungodly reasons. But Mr. Stepp.
I certainly thank Council for all the feedback. I'm sure the staff is assimilating it all and will bring back a very cogent set of policies for us to debate further. But before we go further, as you know, Councillor Reid had a conflict and won't be able to join us until later, and she did pass along 2 comments to me that she asked me to make on her behalf. So it's okay with you, I'll just make those comments now. She She clearly will have much more to say about this at a later date, but she simply wanted to say that she agreed with utilizing density bonusing as a funding source for dealing with certain rental issues, and that she felt that it should be very clear that Coquitlam cannot do this alone, and that had to do any of these solutions in partnership with other levels of government. And so those are the two comments that she would want to put on the table at this time, and those are the only comments I would make.
Thank you. And we've got repeat discussions from Councillor Asmussen and Councillor Robinson. Councillor Asmussen.
Thank you. I guess elaborating a bit more, Councillor Nicholson was saying, we hear from the development industry this point at local government is that we're part of the problem of affordable housing costs because we have development cost charge, amenity bonusing, and it's us that are creating this inequity. But I'd like to see anybody else here to look at the other flip side of the coin. How much are you willing to raise general taxation to make up for the infrastructure that's needed to go in for that housing if we were to eliminate and lower the cost? I think Mr. Hodge made the point is if you eliminate, you have to have a guarantee. But there's two sides to that coin. It's always nice to point it at the local government saying you're charging this, you're making housing affordable. How do we pay for the roads? How do we pay for the amenities? How do we pay for all that other stuff that's generated from that? You'd have to do it out of general taxation. Are you willing to do that? I don't think any councils are. This is the way they've said development should pay for its growth. You know, there's inequities in everything. There's inequities when we look at the general taxpayer paying for services that weren't provided, let's say in Old Coquitlam, that are being provided by those homeowners today, and the taxpayer in general is going to help subsidize that. Is that fair? Is that equal? We do those things out of different reasons, but there's inequities. But I don't think local government, because we charge amenity fees, development cost charges, are the problem of affordable housing. We're dealing with the issues around housing as best we can without impacting the taxpayer at large. So we always hear those. I'm sorry I'm going on, but this just bugs me because it always gets this from the development tree, this stick pointed at us as council, and I think we do a very good job trying to build complete communities. The one thing I will say, though, that does come from on the street when I was out campaigning, I think it showed up in this issue. I think the public talks about affordable housing, but people also look at the issues that a lot of us that lived in Coquitlam might have, like myself, lived in Burnaby, might have lived in Vancouver, elsewhere, because they could not afford to live in those areas, so they did move further out. You know, you look at Vancouver's affordable strategy, they're talking about $31,000 to $86,000 as people that should get affordable housing or subsidized housing in the city of Vancouver. It's a real ball that you're looking at, because the public out there saying, I'm paying for a mortgage, I'm doing this at my own rate, then you're going to subsidize somebody else to live in this community when other people have to move out. So it's a really a delicate balancing act, putting this all together of what we're doing, because not everybody can afford to live or should be subsidized to live in the community they are, because we don't have the tax dollars to do all that. We do have to look at the special income people and groups of people, but it's a complex issue. The last point about amenities and buildings, we require through our process that stratas and buildings have amenities within their complex through our bylaws, and those amenities are paid for and maintained by the strata, just like at the Polygons development at Windsor Glen. They may have somebody there, but that is costed out through the strata fees to all those people within there. So that's part of our rules. Thank you. Councillor Robinson.
Thank you. I appreciate this second opportunity. I was flipping through our affordable housing strategy and came across the end of it, measuring accomplishments, and looking at our goals. And there's two goals that I think that are relevant to this discussion. One is of this document. One of the goals is to preserve and increase Coquitlam's stock of safe, affordable, and appropriate housing. I think we've already adopted a plan that says that at a minimum we have to protect it, but ideally we should be increasing our rental stock. And the second goal is to decrease the number of Coquitlam residents in housing need. And we have a lot of people in housing need. According to, I'm just trying to think of Metro Vancouver's housing data book of April 2011, we have renters in Coquitlam, we have almost 3,000 of them that are in core need, which means that they don't have adequate dwellings for their families, or they're paying more than 30% of their before-tax income to pay for rent. And we have over 1,000 who are in not only in core housing need, but they're spending at least half of their household income on shelter costs. That's half. So I think that previous councils who've adopted this affordable housing strategy have, I think, set the course for us that we ought not to ignore. I think that that direction has already been given. So I would encourage my colleagues and our staff to go back to our affordable housing strategy and pull out some of the key pieces in there, because I think it's actually a fabulous document. It's a little bit dated, some of the numbers, but I think that the message in there is very relevant to this discussion. As well, there is some really good data that the Homelessness Task Group provided for the all candidates briefing session on homelessness and affordable housing in the Tri-Cities back in November. If that could be circulated, I think there's some really good numbers that sort of gives us an idea of what we're looking at. And I'm not saying that we have to build supportive non-market housing like Councillor Sikora is suggesting. I don't think that's our role. But what we do know is that when people have decent housing, they can participate in the economy and provide and can contribute to the economy and pay taxes and become really healthy citizens in all of its forms. Sending them all out to Chilliwack is not my idea of a healthy community. So I think we have to find a way, and I'm looking for some creative ways of doing that. Thanks.
Thank you. This one got bogged down on, well, not bogged down, but we focused an awful lot of attention on the rental component of it. I think that in large measure that will be one of the largest of the issues that we have to face. But it is only a small part of the transit-oriented development stuff that you presented to us. On it, I think we as a council probably will come to the conclusion that we have a housing affordability fund or affordable housing fund that we might be able to use both historically to reimburse for land that we have set aside, but also in future for similar types of investments in core need housing, or at least partnerships with core need housing, but not so much for the rental side. And for the rental side, we will probably need to use the bonus density mechanism, probably the forgiveness of bonus density payments in order to encourage development to include rental in their market rental in their projects. But when all is said and done, we're still not going to be able to achieve an increase in rental housing in this community until tax rules change. You can take a depreciating asset like a brand new car and you can rent it out for 1/3 the price that housing would rent for, and yet it's a depreciating asset. But the tax rules for the person renting out cars are a whole lot easier than the tax rules for someone who is a landlord, and so the market simply won't allow the construction of market rental housing in large measure, and that's going to be a challenge we're going to face until the federal government comes up with changes that will allow or recognize the significantly different market realities in Lower Mainland than exist in the rest of Canada. The rest of Canada doesn't have that kind of massive land component per door for rental housing that we have here, and it's going to be a challenge going forward. So, Mr. Irvin.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just on a concluding note, definitely not bogged down, extremely informative. We brought this discussion to you because we haven't had a good in-depth discussion on some of this from Council to gain your feedback. And I actually heard several points that overlap really well and others where I think we'll need to come back and bring a suite of choices to you. But important from that is that the TDS, the Transit Development Strategy itself, sort of still breaks into 3 areas. There's a strong collection of material that we are prepared to bring back to you very, very soon. We wanted to make sure we heard you today, make sure we keep going from the public feedback we got, and bring back that which makes good, solid sense that we can stand behind to say, Council, we think we're ready to make recommendations on. There are, however, some streams, including the one we've talked about today, that will have to continue some of the parallel work, including some of the parking, which isn't quite done, and including some of the details around the density bonusing. We think those merit individual discussions. We think they merit a little extra study, but we do feel strongly that we can bring those back to you in this fall. We are aggressive, and I think you've seen the kind of timeline we've been able to achieve so far. So I do hope we'll be back to you again shortly with some of the materials we feel very strongly about, but I think we are informed, and those parallel streams, not just planning and development, of course, but transportation, parks, other departments are working on some of those streams as it goes now. That, I hope, will also allow us to move many of the developments that are near us closer forward, so Council can decide if it's right to move with those or not. Thank you.
Moved by Councillor Nicholson, second by Councillor Robinson to receive the report. Is there any further debate? Please.
Just a comment, Your Worship. Yeah, bringing back that policy, we'll make sure that there's detail in there regarding best practices from elsewhere in the region and the efficacy of policies in other municipalities. We definitely did. We are going to do a further scan and also be vetting the policies with the development industry and others, and really undertaking a good consultation process to bring back a robust policy. Thank you.
Thank you. And as you go around to other communities, I urge you to not consider with great weight the communities that charge housing affordability levies, essentially a means of taxing housing in order to make housing more affordable.
Thank you for your feedback.
Thank you. The motion is to receive. All in favor? Opposed? Carried unanimously. We're whipping right along here. We're finished the first item on the agenda.
Item 3, Report of General Manager Planning and Development related to the 2011-2012 Cold Wet Weather MAP Program Update. The recommendations that the committee receive the report for information.
Moved by Councillor Asmussen, seconded by Councillor Reamer. No? All in favor? Opposed? Carried unanimously. Thought there might be a question.
Item 4 is Report of General Manager Parks, Recreation and Culture Services related to fitness equipment replacement funding. We have introductory comments by our General Manager Parks, Recreation and Culture Services and a presentation by our Manager of Recreation.
Do you have a question before that, or?
No, let her present it. That's fine. I got a question, but
Okay, we've got a motion. Councillor Asmussen has moved the recommendation.
Second.
Seconded by Councillor Nicholson.
And we have a brief presentation. This is primarily a financial sustainability report about asset replacement. It describes the idea of a fitness equipment replacement fund to be financed on an ongoing basis through future operating budgets. This is a sustainable approach to managing the city inventory of fitness equipment. The fitness equipment we're talking about is the inventory of cardiovascular and strength training equipment, something that I know you're all very familiar with. These are at the City Centre, Aquatic Centre, Poirier Sport and Leisure.
It shows, does it?
It shows. It's absolutely clear. And also the Glen Pine Pavilion. The approach that's been taken here is similar to the work that was done last year on the city fleet of vehicles. Staff examined the inventory of the fitness equipment, the average lifespan, and replacement cost to create a financial model and determine the amount of money that is needed to sustain the inventory on an ongoing basis. This work's been done both by staff in Parks, Recreation and Culture and our finance department working together. The results of the work indicate that an additional amount of $63,000 in addition to the $40,000 that we currently set aside, making a total of $103,000 each year that needs to be set aside for fitness equipment. And the processing of this is that request would be put forward for consideration as part of the 2013 budget process. I'll now turn it over to Joyce Fordyce, Manager of Recreation, for a brief presentation, and together with Neil Pukash, our Operations Manager of Poirier Sport and Leisure Complex, are here to answer any questions. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, everyone. Nice to see everyone. I had a nice little vacation and back for this one and some other wonderful things before break. So what you have in front of you in your report is issues around our fitness equipment replacement fund. We currently operate 4 fitness centers, City Centre Aquatics, Poirier Sport and Leisure, Glen Pine, and Pine Tree. This report does not deal with Pine Tree because Pine Tree is covered under the partnership agreement with School District 43 and Douglas College, where there already is an equipment replacement fund. And I do want to note that in the report, we had City Center Aquatic Complex opening in 1996. It was 1994 it opened, and it is coming up on 20 years pretty quick. So what we have and what we're talking about is our large fitness centers. And we're looking at 900 visits a day and revenue generated from our fitness centers of approximately $650,000 a year. So our current inventory, what we're looking at is we have 47 pieces of cardio equipment, 85 pieces of strength equipment. At purchase, the value of that was about $586,000. Replacement value today is just under $790,000. So working with finance, each piece of equipment has been entered into a system, life expectancy charted, and a replacement program established that has an ongoing cycle of replacing equipment as it comes near the end, or as it comes to the end of its life before the replacement or repair costs get too high. So what we have is in 1994, when City Center Aquatic Complex opened, $20,000 was sort of earmarked as money to replace and work on fitness equipment. That did not change until last year, where you may remember there was a $20,000 budget item to add to the equipment replacement funding. Now, through doing all the assessment of the equipment and working with Sheena and the wonderful finance crew, it has come out that it's about $103,000 a year to sustain that $800,000 worth of fitness equipment. So we currently have a $63,000 funding gap. And as Lori mentioned earlier, this will come forward to you at budget time. But the purpose of us being here today is to provide some education on it, to answer some questions, and to explain it a little bit further. With me is Neil Pukesh, who is the operations manager who has really worked hard with finance to come up with this program modeled on the fleet. So, thank you, and I'll take any questions I can.
Thank you very much. We've got 5 council members and myself with questions. We'll start with Councillor Sikora.
Yeah, thank you very much. So I think that if this fund is put in the budget, then of course the other part of the budget will drop off, or you're not expecting to say have the budget same as any other year plus the equipment replacement.
Through the chair, right now our maintenance on replacing and repairing some of these equipment is very high. Last year it was $55,000 alone. And if we don't replace our infrastructure in a timely manner, our repair bills will go up. So we're hoping that by coming up with a sustainable model, our repair bills will go down.
Okay, your City Center Aquatic Center is leased out, am I right?
No, we actually operate our own fitness center at our weight room and fitness center.
The Coquitlam Center?
Yes, at City Center.
Yep. Thing, since when? I thought it was farmed out.
You might be thinking of the physiotherapy.
Physiotherapy, okay.
Physiotherapy center, yeah.
Okay, have we ever thought of farming it out, trying to get a handle on it, on all our fitness centers, and have them operated by somebody else that would pay for the equipment within their lease?
If that is the wish of council, staff are more than willing to go explore that option and report back to you on that.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Reamer.
Thank you very much. I'm really happy to see this. I think it's a great idea, such as it was with our fleet replacement. And my question is actually not with respect to the fitness equipment at any of these centers, but do we not have some fitness equipment at Town Centre outdoor, and that was probably gifted to us? And
I'm going to ask Ms. McKay to answer that one.
Yes, there was an installation of outdoor fitness equipment that was installed in 2011, and the funding for that was through a community spirit grant that went to a community group, and they used it to purchase equipment to go into a park.
But we own that equipment?
That is correct.
Okay, so I guess my question is, should that be included in this?
I really like the way you're thinking, because all of these equipment assets do need to be maintained, and eventually they will have to be replaced. And often we get donations that cover the initial installation and purchase price, but there's not an endowment for the ongoing care and ultimate replacement.
And I would assume that with outdoor equipment, there is greater wear than there might be with the indoor equipment.
Certainly the use and the design of outdoor equipment is different than the indoor equipment. For the indoor equipment, we do use very robust commercial equipment. It's quite different than what you find in the home market. But the available supply for outdoor equipment is much more durable and much more vandal resistant. So they have very different designs and different maintenance, and they're also used differently as well, because it is an outdoor public environment. They don't have the benefit of personal trainers, for example, that you see in our indoor facilities that can be providing that coaching and supervision for people on how to use it properly. In an outdoor environment, the designs are very different because the use is very different. And then, of course, you have the whole environmental impact of the weather and temperature changes as well.
And so, is it a good idea to include that equipment in this? Or is it just so different that...
It would be a very good idea, and I think corporately we're looking at doing replacement of different categories of equipment. We had not included park equipment in this particular work about the fitness equipment. It could either be included here as part of fitness replacement, or could become part of a study that does the same thing about all of our park asset inventory.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Hodge.
Okay, you just touched on two of the items I was going to suggest, and I was wondering, because I noticed that the outdoor equipment wasn't included. Is there any other equipment that we're not including that's wearable, in terms of fitness equipment? I mean, we've sort of covered off the sort of the cardio and the strength. Is there anything else? Because essentially, any equipment, anything with a moving part, like our fleet vehicles, has a life expectancy to it. Is there any others in here, such as the ones that Councillor Reamer raised, that it should be included or could be included?
When we started to take a look at this, we looked at all the large pieces that have big costs to them and replacement costs and repair bills to them. We have some smaller equipment, such as balls and mats, and that doesn't need to be included in this, but all the major mechanical equipment with mechanisms and expensive pieces related to our health and fitness is included in this.
Okay. Now, I'm wondering, in terms, we are bringing in the $650,000 per year. I'm assuming that's going into general operating. I mean, there's obviously a high cost to running the facilities, so none of that is earmarked into replacement at this point?
Currently, we have $40,000 marked for replacement for all three sites combined out of the general revenues that come in.
What about our options going forward to leasing? Going in, as stuff comes up for replacement, going to, I wouldn't go quite as far as saying leasing out the facility, but in terms of the equipment, is this something that was sort of considered at the time of purchase, or is it something that that we bring things in with a maintenance contract, or I realize that adds to the operational cost, so it has to be paid for one way or the other. But I'm just wondering, given that the cost of the value of this equipment, the potential for maintenance issues, and you know, anytime I'm in these facilities, they're getting tremendous use. But I can just only imagine those things, that treadmill just going nonstop, what's happening to the bearings and everything in there. And I'm just wondering, are there other options or opportunities to look at other either financing formulas or replacement formulas?
And that's some of the work, excellent question, we did with Sheena's group, and we'll continue to explore a little bit more. Best practices tend to be that municipalities will buy the equipment with service contracts and with a guaranteed buyback at the end of it, which cuts down on your maintenance. We haven't done that in the past. We haven't bought equipment since we bought for the opening of Chimo, and we did have extended warranties on those, but they're all coming to an end now. And so there's all sorts of options we'll look at around maintaining sort of that fitness fleet once we have some sustainability to it.
Yeah, and I think what this report does is it highlights a need in the department, certainly, that we have to start looking at our assets on a replacement value and an ongoing replacement value, much as we've begun doing this with vehicles. But I think certainly this is an opportunity to start addressing this now, instead of 5 years from now, when we suddenly everything reaches its life end all at the same time. And I think that we also have to look at some of our other equipment, including park equipment and other things, and start looking at what the life expectancy is, what the replacement cycle is, and start planning for it now, so that we don't get hit with big one-time capital costs every few years. So I think this is a good report. I think it's a good start. I think it's something we do need to look at. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Robinson.
Thank you. I also think this is moving in the right direction, but I do have some questions about the utilization of equipment at Glen Pine. And I would imagine that life expectancy of that equipment would be in opposite correlation to the life expectancy of the people using the equipment that
Oh, dear. I'm not going to find a point on it.
Well, but it's that idea that, they're not running at a 7.0 speed on these treadmills. But so I wonder about, I'm guessing that they're not as heavily used as our other equipment. So my question is, how many pieces of equipment are there, and should they fall into the same criteria, or should we be cycling them through, or what?
Or what? Very good observation. Glen Pine is our least used per day, per hour center, and it is primarily focused on older adults. And there is that possibility, and we have discussed moving some of that equipment that may only have 2,000 hours on it at 10 years old or 5 years old, as compared to 10,000 hours at 2 years old, and moving it around. There are not many pieces there.
That was my question. So it might not be worth it.
But it's definitely something we do consider and do move pieces from there from time to time.
Okay, and then the other thought I had was, so if we have this really good robust replacement policy, then I would expect that our repairs will go down. And will that be reflected in the budget? That line item will shrink because we're actually going to be doing a better investment in purchasing new.
Purchasing new. I would hope so, but it is going to take us a while to get that fleet all replaced. As Councillor Hodge just mentioned, it's good we're getting ahead of it, but actually we've let it slide a bit. We've got pieces of treadmill equipment right now and ellipticals that are at the end of their life. I mean, it's, we'll spend $5,000 on a treadmill and we can replace it for 10. So, we're at that point now where we need a major refurbishment of our treadmills that were purchased in 2008 coming up in the next year, or else our costs will still be there. So it might take a while to get into that system where we're buying new with the warranties and with maintenance contracts potentially in them. Long-term wise, that would be a hope.
Okay, and so I am curious about how many pieces of equipment we do have at Glen Pine when we talk about it. It doesn't be exact, but are we talking?
With me, I know they have maybe 2 treadmills.
Okay.
Some strength equipment.
So it's a really small, okay, that's fine. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor O'Neill.
Yes, thank you. So you described this presentation as an educational thing and as informative and here to answer questions. But, you know, when I read the report, it seemed to me that it was sort of like softening us up. So, you know, when we come at budget time, oh, yeah, and maybe softening up the public as well. If there's some publicity about that, they'll know that this is something that's, you know, we're going to have to spend and have to raise some taxes on. This is in isolation here. Councillor Sikora talked about, he presumed, I don't know if he was being ironic or not, that if this goes up by $63,000, something else will go down by $63,000. I didn't presume that. I presumed that we're going to have, you know, we're going to be presented with a budget that's got this added above it. Is that correct? Unless, you know, that's sort of the hope. If that's okay.
Okay, I'd be happy to wade into that one.
Ms. McLeod.
This has been referred to budget, so what we'll do as we go through the budget process in any year, we review all of our costs and we review all of our revenues, looking for additional revenues or growth in revenues, and what we'll try to do is we'll try to take this need and match it up to increases in revenues that we have elsewhere. We'll try to bring this back to you where we've looked at it in a more holistic way, but what we want to do is we want to make sure that you come to the budget process as educated as possible. So understanding that we have this need is actually very helpful. Council will remember that over the last number of years, we have been working on asset replacement. One of the most difficult challenges for any level of government is replacement of assets, because over the years we build this enormous base of assets. We now have $1.6 billion worth of them that have to be replaced from time to time, and it's a challenge. So over years we've been working on roads and we worked on vehicles. Now we're working on this one, and we'll be chipping away at it. So we'll do the best we can to make it as painless as possible, but it's a need, and you need to understand that.
And I know in providing recreational opportunities for our citizens that we have a variety of different levels of subsidy. With our outdoor playing fields, we don't charge anybody anything to use those. With our recreation facilities, ice rinks, we got a certain charge. Gymnasium use and shared facilities. Is there some policy in place dealing with this facility that says we have to subsidize this to a certain level? Because it tells me that if I have a feeling that this is subsidized a significant amount. Do we know exactly how much it's subsidized, and do we know why it's at that level?
Perhaps I'll start and invite Joyce or Neil to add additional information. The question is quite timely because staff will be bringing for council discussion a review of our approach on fees and charges generally as it relates to user fees across the broad spectrum of services provided by Parks, Recreation and Culture. And you're absolutely right. There are different levels of cost recovery and subsidy for different types of services, and that's based on a lot of history and council deliberations over many, many years. As it relates to the fitness centers, that is actually one area of service that generates revenue that offsets other subsidies in other parts of the facility. So in this particular report, it highlighted an estimate of $650,000 of revenue that comes in that actually helps to reduce the overall subsidy for City Centre Aquatic Centre as well as Poirier Sport and Leisure. So in a large complex, there are some services where net revenue is generated and it's going to offset areas that are more highly subsidized, such as the pool area. Now, that's looking at the direct costs and the revenue that comes in to offset the costs of the expenses of staff and so on. In none of the services in Parks, Recreation and Culture do we do full cost recovery in terms of capturing all of the infrastructure and investments. But when we look at the direct costs, the fitness centers are an area that does cover its costs and in fact generates some revenue that helps to offset costs in other service areas.
it covers its cost, but the way it's budgeted now, it's not covering its fitness equipment replacement costs, the way the budget's handled now. Is it generating enough money if we kept all the money there in that place that it could cover the fitness replacement, the equipment replacement?
And again, I'll introduce this, but invite Joyce and Neil to add their expertise to it. Certainly, there is enough money there that comes in as revenue, but like all aspects of the budget, the expenses and the revenue are approved by council. I see
everything is interconnected here, and it's not as big of an issue to me with the interconnection of fees or no fees when you were talking about playing fields and things like that, and swimming pools, and as it is with this, because we clearly see that this sort of operation is in direct competition with private operations. And so these issues become, Councillor Sikora was suggesting that maybe we look at contracting it out, just getting a private person in there to run it and using it as a revenue source that way might be a cleaner way of doing it. So there's that issue here that I'm a little concerned with, that we have that direct competition, and that we're using the money from this to help subsidize other areas as well. We're not sure if we're actually charging, are we, what the market would, in terms of full market rate, or we're not charging the same as Steve Nash fitness clubs or anything. Councillor Hodge talked about the fact that he went in there and saw tremendous use of these things. I imagine there's tremendous use because they're a pretty good bargain, right? Or no, am I making a correct assumption?
A lot of local fitness centers right now have some fabulous deals, and their monthly passes and introductories are far below what ours are. An adult drop-in with taxes is $5 and $6. Monthly passes. Our monthly passes include access to the pool and the weight room, but they are, comparable, if not slightly more than what you'll pay at a Steve Nash Center or somewhere else for same access.
Okay, well, that's good information to have. One other suggestion that I had in terms of trying to maximize, or trying to find this money, and this is just all general feedback here, is you've got a captive audience in this place that's actually fairly static, looking one direction the whole time. They're not running around, they're not swimming. I think there's tremendous opportunities to introduce some sort of revenue generation in these rooms with some sort of marketing campaign that you can sell. I mean, people look at a screen, the fitness screens you see right here, maybe the first 15 seconds when they turn that on, they see an ad for something. We can sell that. I know if you look at any video online these days, any of the news sites, or sports highlights or something, before you get to see the 30-second or the 50-second clip, you look at a 15-second commercial. And that's how they make money. We've got all this captive audience here. Perhaps we could be looking at something like that. Perhaps we could be looking at selling sponsorships for the room with fitness-related companies or something. I don't know. There's just all of this is in response to saying, okay, folks, we've got a problem. This is the money we need, and you're going to be expected to fund it. If you're responsible citizens or you're responsible councillors, you're going to have to fund this. This is kind of my response to this. I think there's a lot of different ways we should be looking at this, and so there's my feedback. Thank you.
I appreciate that feedback, and we'll take that into consideration as we look at ways to generate some revenue up there.
Councillor Nicholson.
Thank you. So not for today, but for the day that we deliberate on this at budget, there are some things that I'm going to want to see. I'd like to see a 4-year history of both the replacement reserve funding and the maintenance, both as to budget and as to actual costs for each of those years. And those may generate their own questions. I was also going to ask you, what does the revenue cover? So we've got and that's been touched on already. But we have the statement that the equipment brings in revenue in excess of $650,000. Only $40,000 of that revenue is directed to the equipment replacement reserve. My understanding of the way that we budget is not like that. Okay, we budget the expenditures that staff come to us and say, these are the things we need and what we need them for. And we budget expenditures. And we budget revenues. But if we're going to start saying, these revenues cover these costs and these revenues cover these costs, it's going to be a whole new presentation from Sheena and a whole lot of ultimately arbitrary allocations of costs. I would guess that some of that $650,000 a year, as we just said, a pass covers the pool and the weight room.
Right.
So how much of that money was for the pool and how much was for the weight room, I don't know. And I'm not sure that we can tell, and I'm not sure that we need to. So if we're going to move into thinking about cost recovery on a specific project by project or service by service basis, that's a whole new way of thinking that's going to take lots more time on the part of staff. And Sheena's dying to say something.
It's true that the accountant has raised a question that the other accountant might well have an answer for.
Yeah. Actually, you hit the nail right on the head. The challenge is that when people go into these facilities, they buy a pass for the facility. They don't pay a little price to go on the treadmill and then a different price to go in the pool. It's a more holistic. And realistically, if you look at this kind of big picture, what we've done is by not having this detailed information that we built out of the new model that we built, we didn't really realize what part of the cost we needed to be covering, and too much of that estimated $650,000 is covering the rest of the operations of the facility, because they're not really in isolated, discrete pieces. We operate the facility in a much sort of more holistic way, and I think that actually is better for the customer, because you come in, you buy one pass, and if your kids are in the pool and you want to get a quick exercise, you can do that and run in and get your kids out of the pool. It works better for the community. So the challenge is that we now have a tool that's given us much greater insight into what the real cost of this is. We're utilizing that tool. It's giving us some better information to reallocate this. So when we come to bring this forward to you at budget time, what we'll try to do is match our growth in holistic revenues in that area with this and bring it back to you in a more, an easier way for you to say yes to. But it's really important that you have that sort of general understanding of there is a need there, because realistically, historically, we've probably not allocated this properly. We should have had more subsidy to running the swim pool and directed this money directly into taking care of this equipment, because it's an important thing. There's one other thing I did want to bring up, just in answer to the question around leasing. The city has tried this, where we have a pool of equipment and we've gone out to lease because we thought maybe that was a better way to do things. We did it in a fairly significant way with respect to our computer equipment. And what we found was it's a really great thing to do when you need to build in the discipline for replacement. And we did that for a couple of cycles with ICT, because by building in that lease cost into our budget, at the end of the lease you had to replace the equipment and you didn't have any choice. Once we'd done it once or twice and had the money built into our budget to properly replace things, we came back to council and said, if we bought this ourselves and had the discipline to set aside the money, we had a couple of different advantages. We didn't have to pay a profit to the lessor. If you lease equipment, yes, you pay the price of the asset over the life, but you got to pay a profit to that leaser for taking the risk. And the other thing is, we did also find that there is some equipment that doesn't wear the same as others. And so we had the ability to apply some intelligence to when you did replace it. If you buy a lease for 3 years, at 3 years you're swapping it all out. If you own the equipment, if you got one that's lesser used like Glen Pine, somebody that knows something about the equipment can make a choice and go, let's don't replace that one this time. And we can actually stretch it out a little bit. And our computer equipment, we're stretching out the time a little bit, and it's working to our advantage. So what we try to do is get ourselves into the discipline, and this is the step to get us to that discipline.
Thank you. And I guess I'll just comment that I really appreciate all the additional information, and are we going to budget an extra half day for the budget discussions? Thank you.
I doubt we can get it done in an extra half a day. I myself down, and I think we all accept that fitness is a good thing, but my concern, and Councillor O'Neill raised part of it, is that I'm reticent to support a subsidy on certain types of our operations. We have all kinds of operations. Some of them we're a natural monopoly. There aren't any private sector swimming pools, for example. There are really not a lot of private sector soccer fields or baseball diamonds. So governments step in and they provide these. They provide parks, and we subsidize them because we don't want to charge user fees on parks. We don't want to. We end up subsidizing those things where we don't compete with the private sector. We used to have an operation of our parks department that competed directly with the private sector. It offered a service that the private sector offers as well, but we subsidized ours. We lost money every year, and any other business that lost money wouldn't stay in business. We ended up contracting it out. It's of course the food service concession at the sports center. The new operation, granted, it's a new sports center as well, but the new operation feeds the money into the system and allows us to use that money in lots of different ways. I support the idea that we ought not to be subsidizing those parts of our operation that directly compete with private sector companies and fitness centers. So they directly compete. Our fitness center is in competition with a number of others. So my question was, do we subsidize it? And the answer says no, we don't subsidize it. So why would we need to do this then? And the reason we'd need to do this is because we claw out some of the money from fitness centers revenue, and to the point where we don't have any money to replace the equipment. So I'm going to suggest that I'm much more likely to support a subsidy on some other aspect of our operation that isn't in direct competition with private organizations doing the same thing. But I'm loath to support a subsidy here where it isn't needed, because the operation generates, we've been told, positive cash flow, produces enough money in the year to subsidize other parts of our operation. So if we subsidize the replacement of the equipment, then the operation can subsidize some other aspect, and we will be so muddied in the end that we don't know where our money's going. So if the operation of our hula hoop division of Parks and Rec is losing money, that's the one we ought to be subsidizing if we, in fact, as a public policy, think that's a good investment as a service. If our fitness center is not losing money, let's not have it subsidized. So I'm going to suggest that when this comes back to Council for a budget decision, that whatever other operations we have that do need a subsidy, be it on equipment replacement or whatever, that we be asked to subsidize those. But if, in fact, the fitness centers in the city generate enough revenue to effectively to replace their equipment on their own, then let's let that revenue replace the equipment in the fitness centers, and let's find the thing that needs to be subsidized and make the decision about whether that is an investment that we should be making. The public sometimes will express its cynicism that a budget item might be presented to a council, or be it to the TransLink Board of Directors or the TransLink Mayor's Council or whatever. They'll present something that they think we support enough to fund. And if we support it enough to fund it, we will agree to fund it, when in fact they could have presented some other element and had that in the base budget, and we wouldn't have supported the other element. So they picked the one that we absolutely desperately need as mayors, and I've converted to the Mayor's Council now. We know what they do. They put before us a supplement that says, here's the things that there's no way you're going to vote against. And so we're going to find the funding no matter what. And the mayors go out there and they find the funding. But if they presented some other element that they needed the money for, that's actually hidden in the base budget, we would say no. So the public gets, I think, that level of cynicism about some of these other elements too. So I suggest we try to take the fitness operation, figure out whether it's actually producing enough money to replace the equipment on its own, and then let's isolate it as a profit center, with the term used loosely, and find some other way to replace this equipment. Councillor Asmussen.
Thank you very much. And on the same vein, I think when we're looking at this budget, we're looking at an isolation of a maintenance issue for Parks and Leisure, Parks and Outdoor. areas. I know there was a budget request brought to us, I think, last budget period, and we didn't supply the funds to our maintenance. We have issues of backstops, goals, and other issues that don't have proper funding, don't have a proper maintenance funding. I think it was around $200,000. We were looking to increase the overall maintenance budget. And what I think Sheena took my words. We're looking at for me, it's the more holistic budgeting of maintenance for parks and recs, all the issues in there, coming back to council on this. I think the one issue, or a report on one issue, doesn't really, for me, it's not necessary. I think what I want to see is what are the needs of maintenance. I think we haven't looked and funded the maintenance replacement of assets within the whole Parks and Rec properly for a number of years. We saw that with the pool, the arenas, but when we get down to the other things that don't look big, but they add up to a big cost. I know the field sports users identified the highest priorities, the different backstop, different things that went through a list that we don't have in our budgets the proper funding. I think that's where we're going, I want to look at. I think with the vein, when you're looking at this one here from a council perspective, you're seeing something that generates positive income, and we're asking them to budget more money. I think this one here can look after itself on its own if we readjust the budgeting up, because it's creating a positive cash flow. But then you can take that positive cash flow out of that and use that positive cash flow in budgeting to maybe help with the funding throughout the holistic of the parks and recreation. I can understand our need for fitness equipment and everything because it creates a draw for greater use of our facilities. And I think if we were to take, let's say, the pools and we left them strictly as a swimming pool with no other draw of fitness facilities, we'd probably have less use of those facilities and have probably a higher subsidy rates within them. So I think this creates a greater draw, a greater multiple use. More people that might not have swam before will swim, and i.e. use fitness equipment, so you get that cross benefit of it. So I don't see it really so much as competition. I think we're serving a market that's always been there for a long time, but I think it also helps maximize the use of our buildings and create that better return for us. But I would like to see, when this comes back to budget, an overall look at all the issues within parks and recreation that are not properly being funded, as I've pointed out, and a more holistic look at our infrastructure requirements and budgeting requirements within parks. I know Parks Rescue, Mrs. McKay brought that to us last budget, but I think that really needs to be, is being highlighted here, and I think it needs to be highlighted on the backstops, the other issues that are not, or have not been funded over the years, that are 20 years old, 30 years old, and are in danger of becoming a hazard for our playing fields and different areas. So, thank you.
Councillor Reid did let us know that she was unavoidably detained somewhere else, so she's arrived now, and I go to the late Councillor Reid. Sorry, the
late
Councillor Reid, who's Councillor Reid.
I had a doctor's appointment. I feel really bad now. Just a minute. I'm still here.
Oh, hop on the fitness equipment.
So, two things got to me on this report, and two things happened this week that make this quite a timely discussion. And I walked in to listen to Councillor O'Neill bring up the outside fitness industry business, of which we have quite a few places here, and getting more. And being that we are requiring commercial in all the bottoms of our big high-rises we're building our town centre, I'm hoping that we will be looking at zoning that won't preclude other dance studios, fitness studios, and all that. So the other thing that happened to me this week was I happened to be over with the little dog walking around the pool, Eagle Ridge Pool, which was packed. And a lady came, and she had 4 little kids in tow. And I'm looking at her, and I says, oh, I guess they're, so happy to be going. Yes. Well, they come from Millardville. And only one parent could come because they couldn't afford the bus fare for 2 and 4 kids. And we were stupid enough to close down Rochester Pool. And I remember arguing this and then listening to the financial argument, and there we went. This isn't fitness equipment, but it is, just on a different shape. So this is the kind of thing we should be subsidizing. The things that we can get the kids into, that they can use, that the neighborhoods need. We, in this city, I think we've got to stop trying to be all things to all people. We don't need to be in the fitness industry. If there's all kinds of businesses out there, let them do it. And it must cost us more, because I'll tell you, if you go down and ask some of these fitness places what they're paying their staff, it's not a touch on what we pay ours. So we just have to look at all this stuff. I think we need a new model on what cities should supply. And the mayor just said sort of the same thing. This is where we really have to take a good look and see if what we're doing is really the best bang for the buck for our citizens and for the kids. And right now, I don't think it is. I think maybe the private sector is here now. They've arrived. We're growing like a bad weed. And I think perhaps we could get more and more fitness industries into our town center, and they won't have to compete with a city who's in a business that we really don't need to be there for, that we can really put our money and put our services and our energies into something that the private sector can't provide. And I really would like Ms. McKay and her staff to just really do a rethink. Should we be all things to all people, or should we not? And when we go to build big facilities, we can do public-private partnerships. When Councillor Asmundson mentions our buildings, yeah, but I can lease these buildings out to physiotherapists, to whatever. I can lease out our space. I can still get money back for our space. But I don't know that we should even be in some of this business. I really, really don't know that we should. I'm done. Thank you.
Councillor Sikora.
Thank you very much. You know, a lot of comments from a lot of council members. Council Reid is bang on what she's saying on a different thing. Look, I'll tell you what. Here we are. It's making money. That's what we say. Well, we're bleeding that somewhere. And I can't understand how we can be taking, you know, and then asking the council members to give you more money for something else because the equipment needs to be replaced. You know, run it like a business. If it's making money, then you should have self-sustained and have the money in there on a yearly basis to replace the equipment. That's very, very simple. You know, and another thing, who's to say that if all these fitness centers went out to public tender, maybe we can get a much better deal for the city. The space is worth a lot of money. Are we charging rent to ourselves for these spaces or not? We deem this $650,000. You're not. Well, there you are, see? Are we charging light and power? No, we're not. You know, take a good look at it. You know, let's say, you know, if I went in there and ran that fitness center on my own, that's my own business, I'd have to replace all the equipment as it breaks down. All the equipment was broken down. It'd be in my lease agreement and everything else. I'd be paying rent. I'd be paying light. I'd be paying power and everything else. So really, frankly, you say we're bringing in $650,000. The $650,000, is that making money? No, it's not. It's probably losing money. So we need to get a grip with it. I remember we went to cater to let out the food services at the ice arena. Did we make a right decision? Of course we did. You know, we have money coming in. We're not losing money, and a whole lot of things that are happening. This may be another thing I'm looking at. I tell you what, I don't want. You know, I know that this for information only, so I'll receive it for information only. But frankly, I want the staff to come up with a much better proposal. Farming it out, what does it do for us? You know, is it going to bring us some money in? Is it, and will the people that rent the place every 10 years have a contract to where they replace the equipment and everything else? Of course they would. You know, would they pay the rent? Of course they will. Would they pay light and a few light and power and a few other things? Of course they will. You know, I mean, take a look at it.
We beat this one to death.
And that's the last speaker, mercifully. The receipt's already on the floor, or actually the recommendations were on the floor. All in favor? Opposed? Carried unanimously. Sorry.
Item 5, last item, is the report of General Manager, Parks, Recreation and Culture Services related to the Tri-City Seniors Network project. We do have a presentation by our manager of community recreation manager.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. Nice to see you all after such a sunny weekend. I'm here to talk about the Tri-City Seniors Network project, and the purpose of this report is to follow up on Council's request from February the 6th, and for staff to hear from you, Council, regarding your preferred approach for future seniors committees in Coquitlam. As some background, the Tri-City Seniors Network project was funded by the United Way of the Lower Mainland and administered by the Glen 50 Plus Society. It was a grassroots community research project through community consultation and focus groups, with findings presented on May the 29th of 2012, just a month and a bit or so ago. And as you can see from this report, the main 5 themes from the research were the need for seniors planning committees, and as it says in the report, seniors planning for seniors, improving communication and information delivery, the value of recreation and social participation, as well as transportation and housing options, and improving community support and health services. In terms of the next steps, using the findings of the Tri-City Seniors Network project, the group Community Volunteer Connections has a follow-up grant application in process to determine a structure for Tri-City Seniors Planning Table. Moving forward, the options for city committees include the creation of a Seniors Advisory Committee of Council, alternatively, add seniors representation to all current advisory committees, or wait for recommendations of committee structure from the next phase of the grant that we're expecting to be completed in early 2013. So at this time, staff would like to hear from Council about your preferred approach for future committees involving seniors, and myself, Joyce, and Robin Newton are here to answer any questions you may have.
Okay. We've got three so far. Councillor Reamer.
Thank you very much. I've been following this process quite closely, and I think it would be my preference at this time for us to wait until this last phase is completed before making any decisions around whether or not we appoint a senior to our advisory committees or whether we strike a seniors advisory committee. I do think, however, given my knowledge of other senior planning tables that exist, and there are none in the Tri-Cities, there is going to have to be some sort of conduit of information and recommendations from that seniors planning table to local government. And so I'm very mindful that that's going to have to occur. And once they get their seniors table up and running with this last phase, that may become very clear. On the other hand, it may not. But I am thinking that from a government perspective, from a change perspective, about delivering programs and services for seniors, we are going to have an ability for seniors to be able to make recommendations to local government to make any changes that they see necessary. So I just wanted to see that, to say that right now. I'm happy to go along and wait until the completion of this last phase. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Asmussen.
Well, similarly, I think, I support the idea of a seniors committee, but I think really this process has started. We need to have that funding, once if they get it, to finish off the information, and then look at how we're going to set up a committee or what type of structure we'll need. And I don't think we can do that until we let this finish its course on this research of this. On adding a representative to committees of a senior person, my experience over the years, I've been on committees before council, during council's chair, a lot of people on our committees are seniors already. I think the one area where we lack representation a lot of times is youth. But I think our committees already, I don't think we need to identify a senior for our committees, because I think they're well represented within our committee structure already and have been for a long time. So I don't think that's needed, but I'm looking forward to, in 2013, the completion of the work. And I think Councillor Reimer said it perfectly, that we need to have that communication, that conduit information into that table. But I think it's going to be interesting to see what the recommendations from that are when that research is all completed. So thank you for the report.
Thank you. Councillor Robinson.
Thank you. Well, surprise, surprise, I'm actually going to disagree with Councillor Asmundson. I sit on two committees that the Tri-Cities Homelessness Task Group, which is actually in transition of changing its name to the Homelessness and Housing Task Group. They're going through a strategic plan looking at housing issues on a much broader scale. And on the Universal Accessibility Advisory Committee. And we, so, I know. And I find that it would make sense holistically to, rather than have a seniors advisory committee looking at housing issues when there's already a community table looking at housing issues, to have somebody designated who sat there looking at with that particular lens would be a much more fruitful, and we won't be sort of spinning our wheels or recreating the wheel anyway. So I think having one community based table looking at that particular issue would be helpful. And the other one, in terms of the Universal Accessibility Advisory Committees, we don't have a senior sitting on there looking at it, and it's one of the things that we were trying to address and haven't found. And again, it's there's already work happening because accessibility and inclusion isn't exclusively a seniors issue. And so I would hate to see us doubling our efforts or having different conversations at different tables, or having similar conversations at different tables, but they never really connect. So I do think it's important, and I'd like to hear, to see sort of what comes out of that, but I think it's a disservice to ignore what groups are currently doing and seeing if it makes sense to have a group of seniors who come with that particular lens, and they go out into existing work and come back and report out on their particular issues, rather than having yet another table. So that's just some things that I come forward with. Thanks.
Councillor O'Neill.
Yes, thank you. I'll start my speech, little presentation, with exactly the same words except for one that Councillor Robinson started. Well, surprise, surprise, I'm actually going to disagree with Councillor Robinson. Surprise, surprise. And you started that with Asmundson. Does that mean you're going to agree with him? Yeah, that's right. So, so option one I had is too soon. Option two, no. Option three, yes. So, and since we talked specifically about, you just talked about your support of option two, I will say the reason I'm opposed to that is that will then open the door to every identifiable subgroup demanding a specific seat on every specific committee. And you'll have visible minorities, Aboriginal, gay, lesbian, transsexual, bisexual, disabled, youth, men, women. There's probably more seniors you want too. So if we do this,
various faiths as well.
Pardon me?
Various faiths.
Faiths as well, I guess. Sure. Height disadvantaged, tall people, redheaded. All of these, you know. So it just goes in. I think it opens the door to craziness there. So I firmly reject number two there. And I think, like Councillor Reamer and Councillor Asmundson, number three, the third option, is the best. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Zakora.
Yeah, thank you very much. I serve on a committee also on, they're mostly seniors, or almost seniors, you know, the committee that I'm on. So the fact is that, you know, I'll tell you what, I think that, you know, we're almost committed to death in these council chambers. We're committed to that, where we're wanting to pick committees and committees, add to the committees, do all kinds of whole lot of things, and I'll tell you, I think that we have bogged ourselves down with a system that is almost going to be unworkable, and that's all I'm going to say.
Okay, question.
No, actually, I had a couple of comments. I disagree, actually. Surprise, surprise. No, I'm not going to go there. But I don't know that we're bogged down with too much advice. I think that we can get advice. We don't represent everybody in our community. We're not as culturally diverse as our community. There's lots of realities in our community that we don't represent, and we can get advice on a whole range of issues. There were a number of issues that were raised here under the themes, the emerging themes of the network's research, and that included things like the fact that our senior centers don't reach the diverse community, the ethnically diverse community, and there's issues within that. There's socioeconomic groups, and there's some that feel isolated and others that are well connected. And I suspect what we would end up if we decided to opt for option 2, the putting a senior on every committee, would be a bunch of well-connected seniors that currently sit on our other committees or who are involved in our community, trying to represent seniors who are immigrant seniors who don't speak English, or trying to represent that group of seniors who feel isolated. And the only thing that they have in common with that group of seniors that comes from another country or feel isolated here is that they're both of the same age. And I don't know that that by itself is enough reason to appoint specific age groups or specific, as Councillor O'Neill just laid out, a whole bunch of other creeds and cultures and faiths and races on every committee that's an advisory committee. So I don't agree with that one. I agree with option 1, but I don't know that we're right there yet, because there's a dialogue going on or needed perhaps at the regional level. So the third option may well be the most appropriate one, though I think I really support the idea that we as a council could benefit from advice of a diverse group of seniors in a community that is aging, a community that houses a great many retired persons, a community in which the issues associated with seniors will perhaps be some of the biggest issues and the biggest budget pressures that we have in the next decade. And I think we're wrong to not seek advice from that group as soon as we possibly can, and perhaps at a regional level, or sub-regional level. So I would be fine with option 3 at this point. And I apparently have raised the ire of Councillor Nicholson and Councillor Reid. Councillor Nicholson.
No, you haven't raised my ire at all, Your Worship.
There you go.
Not even my Irish. And my Irish, we're Scottish until sometime in the 1600s anyways.
When you went astray.
You really don't want to start me in a 10-minute recital of my history and how it compares to the Scots who were afraid to leave home and all that sort of stuff. Anyway, this report says seniors want to be engaged and involved in the planning of services and programs. The report recommends the development of a grassroots regional planning table with diverse representation from the seniors community. The work that's been done thus far does not lead to a recommendation to this council. It leads to a recommendation that they get together, work out what it is they want to do, and become a voice speaking to whomever. And so option 3 is the report's option. And I'm not sure where the other 2 options came from, except there's a tradition that you have to give council 3 choices. And often the one choice that's really that staff really wants is quite apparent, and I think it's option 3. But all the report asks us to do is receive the report, and I think that's all that we need to do. Thank you.
And I was only suggesting that whenever they present a report, if we have some thoughts on the subject, we tend to wax, and that's because they asked us to. And so I thank you very much for that. And Councillor Reid.
Option 3.
Thank you.
There's no doubt about it, and it's the only one that makes sense. I'm done.
Thank you. Is the motion to receive on the floor? It is not. Moved by Councillor Reamer, seconded by Councillor Nicholson. To receive, all in favor? Opposed? Carried unanimously. Thank you very much.
I have a question. Richard, I have a question.
Councillor Robinson.
Thank you. I just have a question. We received some a communication from School District 43 regarding the dog park and a request to change the location, and I just want to see if staff have had a chance to take a look at that and And just
Same issue. I was going to raise it.
just report back around, or
Ms. McKay.
let us know the status of the request.
The correspondence has been received, and we've read it. The contract has already been let for the project, so perhaps we'll be able to engage in further dialogue once we've looked more closely at the opportunities and challenges.
Thank you.
Councillor O'Neill, I believe on the same issue.
Yes, on the same issue. I was going to raise it at the end of tonight's meeting, so I thank you for bringing it up now. And I want to. It's an issue that I think we should acknowledge that and make sure the public knows that we're in receipt of this and we're not just dismissing it. That this is an important issue. We have an important relationship with School District 43. And I think it's important that when they do an extraordinary thing like this, to write us a letter, that we treat it very seriously. We got a letter a couple of months ago from Port Coquitlam Council, and they're not very happy about something we've done regarding zoning a high-rise, and we're getting this letter here. We don't want to make enemies with our own neighbors, obviously, and School District 43 is an important ally to have, so however we deal with this, it needs to be treated very seriously, I think. Thank you.
Thank you. Actually, on that subject, I gather that the school district was part of the process of evaluating the options for the park, and I believe they actually had input and maybe even signed off on it to some degree. Perhaps you can let us know, Ms. McKay, a bit of history on that.
I'll have to go from my memory. I don't have the file with me today, but there was an extensive consultation with the broad community around the redevelopment of Glen Park and the development of the master plan. One of the foundational documents that was used was actually a safety report that School District 43 had commissioned. It was a SEPTED report that they had worked with the RCMP on, and in that report it highlighted some of the safety issues at the school site, and actually suggested that a dog off-leash area would be desirable just on the other side of the fence where there were some undesirable activities. If you recall, that was an undeveloped part of the park, and there were some inappropriate activities that were going on in that forested area right next to the school. And there was evidence of people entering the school site from the former park site and causing damage to school property, and it was a significant safety concern. So they had commissioned a report with the RCMP, and one of the recommendations that came from that was to activate the park on the adjoining property, and specifically had suggested a dog off-leash area might be an appropriate activity. So we certainly took that information as well as lots of other information and consulted with the community, and that included representatives from the school staff on site around the development of the various concepts, and several open houses, public meetings, council deliberations, until ultimately the master plan was approved. And it did, in fact, include an off-leash area in the area that had been identified through the SEPTED review. We understand in further discussions with School District 43 that not all of the communications that were going on with the school staff and the city necessarily were involving all of the administration of School District 43. And so there is some question, I think, around how the School District 43 in the future wants to represent their interests and needs as they participate in community consultation processes. And we're happy to work with school district, with their local school population, or with their senior representatives in whatever way is going to lead to the best decision making for the community. The idea of a dog off-leash area in the city centre was also part of a larger public consultation when the city was involved in looking at where to put dog off-leash areas throughout the city. And that was the subject of a number of reports to council and a separate community consultation process. And through that process, it was clear that the Glen Park was really the only option in terms of locating a dog off-leash area to serve the city centre area. So it is certainly something that involved an awful lot of general dialogue in the community, as well as specific work with School District 43. But nevertheless, we do take this most recent input from School District 43 very seriously, and I'm sure it will be the subject of future discussions with Council.
The reason I ask, obviously, is because, as others have said, we want to respect and value our participation with our partners and the various other groups in our community, and the school board is a big one. So it's perhaps a little frustrating for us to have gone through a process that we thought we were dialoguing with representatives of the most relevant school, and in turn found out that maybe we were talking to the wrong people or not talking broadly enough. Are there some, it seems to me that the concerns of the school district are the perception of risk, the actual risk, and perhaps even the visibility of dogs from the school. Sorry?
Sorry.
Okay. And perhaps even the visibility of dogs from the schoolyard. And so I'm wondering whether there is a fence treatment that could resolve one or more of those concerns. If the issue is proximity and none of the other three, then I'm not sure what we do. But I certainly, we've gone to great lengths to try to be as inclusive as possible in the design of that park. And I'm going to echo the comments, the initial comments about unsavory activity. That park has been unsavory activity and had hosted unsavory activities since I can remember. I worked there 30 years ago in that park, and we had in that particular forest stuff happening. When I walked through it about 2 months ago, as the vegetation was being removed, we found there was drug paraphernalia and stolen articles, and that's the most benign of the unsavory activity that has taken place in those bushes. So this is an enormous improvement, and I'm frustrated by the fact that this is coming up now after we've signed contracts. So Councillor Reid has something to say.
Thank you. Well, I've had a couple of enlightening phone calls since we've had a big development around the Glen Park area, and there's been lots of people phoning on it. Several of the folks who are phoning are thinking that an off-leash park is a place where people take these ginormous dogs with big teeth and drop them off for the day, off-leash. So the dogs are going to run all over and do whatever the heck they want, and I guess then pick them up after work. I don't know.
Well, after they've eaten the smaller dogs.
Well, of course, or the kids or whatever else is around. So a lot of the folks there, I don't really think understand the concept of what the off-leash is. And I've had, I guess, maybe 2 for sure, maybe 3 people thinking that that's what it is. And I think there's a bunch of things we need to know. Is one, it's much safer than the option that Mayor Stewart was speaking about, which we know has been happening. 2, it's a school. Learning about pets is something that Canadians do, and we have lots of pets, whether they be dogs or pussycats or birds or bunnies or whatever they are. It's a teaching and learning experience. I remember the SEPTED thing with the RCMP, and it's great. I just think that we've done our job, and I just wonder if the communication that's getting back to the school board is perhaps some of the stuff I've been hearing. It is not a place you come and dump off your dog for the day. So there you go.
Ms. McKay.
Up to this point, our understanding was their interests were around the fencing and the fencing treatment. And so we have provided additional information about the treatment that we would do to the existing fence there to minimize any, risk of little dog noses getting through the chain link fence, or worse, little fingers and sandwiches or recessed snacks, passing through the chain link fence to mitigate any potential interface issues related to the fence. So I'm not aware of any other concerns, but certainly our first action after receiving the letter will be to have a direct dialogue with school board representatives to see if we can understand the nature of their concerns. And that'll inform us as to whether there are easy resolutions or really what our next steps might be. Up to this point, it's been about fencing, and we thought that that was resolved. Our plan was to put a see-through mesh on the existing fence, again, that would prevent anything from going through, but would still create that visual connection that everybody wants for safety reasons.
And that owners stay with their pets. I mean, that's what happens at off-leash parks.
Absolutely, and the off-leash parks are a way of animating the site, bringing people into that area. They don't tend to attract really large numbers of people, so I can't imagine that the noise or crowding would be an issue. But again, we need to have a direct conversation with them to understand what their interests and concerns are.
Thank you.
Thank you. Actually, no, sorry. Councillor, on a slightly different subject, well, quite a bit different, but Councillor Reid just raised the question of dropping off for the afternoon. I dropped my daughter off for swimming. She's 16, and so when I picked her up, she was talking about two 8-year-old, 9-year-old girls that had been dropped off, and they get dropped off 3 times a week during the evening for 4 hours to swim at the pool. I guess as a cheap form of child minding. And I have since talked to a couple of staff there, and they said, yeah, it is an issue where they're trying, obviously you're not allowed to do that, but trying to catch up with these young people who are perhaps going through Adult Swim or the various other swimming programs. What can we do, what does the city do to try to, and perhaps I shouldn't have just dumped this on you without warning, but Councillor Reid raised the question about some other creatures.
We just love these rapid-fire rounds. They keep us sharp. But I'm going to invite Joyce Fordyce to provide information about the rules with 8-year-old children at our swimming pools.
Thank you. Typically, we monitor for children that are underage and can't swim appropriately and contact their parents. Lots of times you'll have children coming in that don't have ID, that will say they're 10 years old or 11 years old. You phone their parents, you check them in class, it says that they're 11, yet they're likely less younger than that. So our standard is to phone the parents, have the discussion with the parents, have them come in and pick them up when it does happen. Excessively, but we do have that happening, particularly at some of our outdoor pools.
And if I could comment maybe on the broader social policy issues, dogs at large, there are agencies to deal with that in terms of children at large. Similarly, there are agencies that can intervene in those cases as well, very sensitively with qualified social workers and whatnot, although sometimes people are hesitant to bring in agencies. From my perspective, if the choice is that there's a latchkey underage child or a child out just wandering the streets, I'm actually happy to know that they're in a safe and supervised environment with caring staff that will at least ensure that they're safe during that period of time.
Well, it does seem like an inexpensive form of child care. Seeing no other questions, the motion was adjournment from Councillor Robinson, seconded by Councillor Hodge. All in favor, opposed, carried. Thank you.